Hey guys, what's going on? So today we are doing something different. As you can see, my last videos didn't break 50 views mark, so I don't know if I have audience for this type of content. Nevertheless, I'll continue this journey as a hobby and as a thank you for a few of my subscribers. This is a compilation of my last few videos about disturbing cold cases and disappearances. So, hope you enjoy, and thanks for being here. What's going on, guys? While I'm trying to build a place to live in Minecraft, I thought to vent about things. This is a new format I'm testing, so do write below what you think about it. Lately, I became obsessed with unexplained disappearances in true crime. I mostly read about it in between playing since I'm unemployed, but I figured if I already reading it, why wouldn't I just read it out loud while I play? So yeah, I'll stop with yapping and start with the cases. The disappearance of 21-year-old Nadia Erica Cole. It has baffled many, primarily given the peculiar details surrounding the investigation. In May of 2024, Nadia was engaged to a man named Aaron Ong from Idaho, though she was residing in Port Angeles, Washington. Nadia had recently graduated from Washington State University. She was eagerly anticipating a holiday trip to Italy with her mother, Beata. The trip had been planned for over a year, you know. They were incredibly excited to depart from Seattle-Tacoma International Airport in Washington. Upon arriving at the airport, the case took an unexpected turn. Nadia told her mother she needed to use the restroom and left her carry-on bag with Beata. CCTV footage later obtained by police showed Nadia leaving the airport at 3:08 p.m., appearing visibly anxious. Later that afternoon, around 4 p.m., security footage captured her in downtown Seattle at 3rd Avenue and University Street. She was exiting a streetcar and heading toward the waterfront, after which she seemingly vanished without a trace. When Nadia's family couldn't reach her, they naturally reported her missing. The Port of Seattle Police Department launched an investigation, uncovering more perplexing details. Investigators found that Aaron Ong had also left for a trip that exact same day. He and his young daughter were supposed to go on a fishing trip to Montana and return after 5 days. However, Aaron and his daughter never came back. This prompted his family to report them missing to the Pullman Police Department. A warrant for Aaron's arrest was issued on June 3rd for custodial interference after he failed to return his daughter to her mother. Investigators suspect that Aaron has absconded with his daughter. They believe he had absolutely no intention of returning her. They think his disappearance is linked to Nadia's, though they have yet to find conclusive evidence. A $10,000 reward is currently being offered for information leading to Nadia's current whereabouts. A tip from a member of the public claimed to have seen Nadia in the Washington area in late May, but this could not be confirmed. Nadia is described as having blonde hair and green eyes. She stands 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighs 130 pounds. She was last seen wearing a green hooded top and black yoga pants. She wore a black jacket and white shoes, while carrying a tan shoulder bag. Aaron Ong is described as having black hair and brown eyes. He stands around 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighs 135 pounds. While investigators believe the couple is traveling together, this remains entirely speculative. No concrete proof has been found. If you have any information regarding Nadia's case, please contact the Port of Seattle Police Department at 206-787-5411. Anyone with information on Aaron Ong's whereabouts should contact the Pullman Police Department at 509-3340-802. Alternatively, you can reach the Shepherd Shield Security Group at 877-220-8129. The mystery surrounding Nadia Erica Cole's disappearance remains unsolved. Her family and friends continue to seek answers, desperately hoping for her safe return. The Bible John case, it refers to a series of unsolved slayings, specifically 3 young women in Glasgow, Scotland between 1968 and 1969. Well, these crimes were all potentially carried out by the same man, a seemingly religiously obsessed individual. The victims? Patricia Docker, age 25, Jemima McDonald, age 32, and Helen Puddock, age 29. I mean, they were all mothers. Mothers who had spent their evenings at Glasgow's popular Barrel and Ballroom nightclub right before being slain. They were found brutally beaten and strangled. Actually, each woman was on her period at the time of death, a grim detail. One that later fueled intense theories about the perpetrator's ultimate motive, you know? Patricia Docker was an auxiliary nurse. She was the first known victim. On February 23, 1968, her body was found in a Glasgow alleyway near her home in the Battlefield district. Like, many of her personal belongings were just missing: her clothing and her handbag, her watch. This suggested the perpetrator deliberately removed them from the scene. Initially, doctors received limited leads. Police struggled, basically due to a complete lack of witnesses and physical evidence. Her parents, they had thought she went to a totally different dance hall that night. It was over a week before a witness came forward to confirm seeing her at the Barrowland Ballroom. This single fact led to a significant delay in the initial investigation. So the case went cold. In August 1969, a second attack re-energized the investigation. Jemima McDonald, a 32-year-old mother of three. She spent the evening of Saturday, August 16, 1969, dancing at the Barrowland Ballroom. When she failed to return home, her sister grew deeply concerned. Tragically, on August 18th, Jemima's body was discovered in an abandoned tenement building by her own sister, actually. Local children had spoken of finding a body. Unlike Docker, she was found fully clothed. But investigators immediately noted striking similarities between the two cases. Both women had spent their last evenings at the Barrowland. Both were strangled. Both were on their periods when slain. Then, on October 31st, 1969, the body of Helen Pudicchio was found behind her Glasgow home. This marked the third and final known act of this perpetrator. Helen, 29, had also visited the Barrowland Ballroom the night before. She was accompanied by her sister, Jean Langford. Keep Jean Langford in mind. Her evidence is going to be extremely important going forward in this case. They met two men at the dance hall. Oddly, both called themselves John. After midnight, the group of four left together. One man departed earlier to catch a bus. Helen and Jean, well, they shared a taxi with the other John. During the taxi ride, this well-spoken man revealed oddly intense views. He spoke disapprovingly of married women attending nightclubs. He referenced the Bible repeatedly, remarking on Old Testament punishments for adultery, right? Jean also remembered that he mentioned he didn't drink on New Year's Eve. He preferred to spend his time praying. These comments made a strong impression on Jean. The man insisted on dropping Jean off first, even though her home was farther away, leaving him alone with Helen. It was the last time Jean saw her sister alive. The next morning, Helen Puddick was found in her backyard, partially clothed and brutally beaten. With the third slaying's obvious parallels to the others, a young mother attacked after a Barrowland night out, police were utterly convinced they faced a serial perpetrator. The manhunt for Bible John escalated rapidly after Helen was discovered. Jean Langford provided a detailed description of the suspect. A tall, slim man. He was well-dressed, in his mid-20s, with short, reddish-blonde hair and overlapping front teeth. Detectives widely distributed the drawing. Interestingly, they noted that his hairstyle was so unfashionable that a local barber might recognize the cut. They ended up showing it to almost 500 local barbers. No leads. The investigation soon became one of the most intensive ever seen in Scotland. Over 100 detectives were assigned full-time. More than 50,000 witness statements were taken. Additionally, thousands of potential suspects were questioned within the first year alone. Undercover officers even patrolled Glasgow dance halls, including the Barrowland, hoping Bible John might return to his hunting ground. Despite the massive manhunt and numerous tips, no arrest was made. By the early 1970s, the trail had gone entirely cold. Some officers theorized that the unknown perpetrator might have died, or maybe he had been incarcerated for another crime, or that he may have been investigated and ruled out as a suspect. Trust me, you're going to want to keep that last point in the back of your mind. Others thought he may have simply left the area. This perhaps explained why the slaying stopped as suddenly as they began. With no further cases linked to Bible John, the case gradually moved into the realm of pure speculation. One early avenue of suspicion was that the slayings might not have been the work of a random predator at all, rather the result of separate domestic crimes. In later reviews of the case, some detectives noted that both Patricia Docker and Jemima McDonald had troubled marital histories. Docker was estranged from her husband Alex at the time of her death. The two were in the process of divorce, and Alex was on leave in Glasgow that week. He was an early suspect. Investigators learned he had a potential motive, and he even checked into a hotel with another woman the very day after Patricia's slaying. This was seen as perhaps a celebratory measure taken by Alex Docker though nothing could be proven. Likewise, Jemima McDonald had recently separated from her husband and moved back to Glasgow. These connections led some within law enforcement to believe that at least 2 of the 3 Bible John cases might actually have been unrelated attacks perpetrated by people intimately known to the victims. Another suspect emerged years after the Bible John terror: John Irvine McInnes, a former soldier and a cousin of a very senior Glasgow police official. McInnes was never publicly named during the original inquiry, but a secret 1995 review of the case zeroed in on him as a potential Bible John. Detectives in that review suspected that McInnes might have been the unidentified man in the taxi with Helen Puttock. Further, they even suggested that the original lead investigator, Joe Beatty, deliberately steered attention away from McInnes. Why? Because McInnes' cousin was his personal friend. In 1995, police obtained permission to exhume John McInnes' body. McInnes had reached his end voluntarily in 1980. Thankfully, despite the Bible John slayings having taken place in the late 1960s, all biological evidence was preserved. The results were inconclusive, however. The genetic sample did not match, nor did it definitively exclude McInnes. Notably, in a 2022 BBC podcast, the detectives who re-examined the case in 1995 indicated a startling fact. They would have arrested McInnes for the slaying of Helen Puttock if he had still been alive. Oddly, despite incredible improvements in DNA analysis since the mid-90s, the evidence hasn't been retested as yet. That said, the involvement of McInnes remains a controversial theory. While McInnes fit many aspects of the profile, such as being from a strict religious background, Jean Langford couldn't identify him conclusively as the man from the cab. The most famous theory to emerge in modern times is the possible link between Bible John and convicted serial perpetrator Peter Tobin. Tobin, who was from Glasgow, was found guilty of 3 slayings between 1991 and 2006. In 2006, after Tobin's arrest, detectives launched Operation Anagram. The goal was to retrace his life and see if he could be tied to other unsolved crimes. Several intriguing connections came to light. Tobin had lived in Glasgow in the late 1960s, not far from the Barrowland. He even married his first wife in August 1969, right after meeting her at the Barrowland Ballroom itself in 1968. Now, to be fair, this isn't quite as odd as I initially thought it was, given that the venue has a capacity of almost 2,000 people. He was known for his violent hatred towards women. All 3 of his former wives later described the already violent Tobin flying into a terrifying rage when they were on their periods. Investigators have long suspected the Bible John perpetrator targeted his victims during this exact time of the month. This behavioral parallel, along with reports that Tobin was deeply religious, heavily supported this theory. Tobin was also known to use the alias John Semple. Jean Langford couldn't remember the exact last name Bible John gave, but she believed that it was Templeton. Investigators and theorists have noted that Semple sounds extremely close to Temple. However, there's no hard evidence linking Tobin to the Bible John slayings. And actually, there's good evidence that he didn't do it. Going against the theory is the fact that Tobin moved to Brighton, England in early August 1969. His ex-wife has vehemently denied he could have slipped away to Glasgow to commit the final 2 horrendous acts. And wait, let me add this detail. Tobin was 5'6", and Jean Langford had explicitly remembered Bible John being a notably tall individual. I think it's also important to note that Tobin and Bible John simply don't bear any meaningful physical resemblance. Tobin has dark hair and dark eyes. Bible John, even when seen in low light, was identified as having reddish blonde hair and blue eyes. Interestingly, some investigators who've worked on the Bible John case have commented on the strong internal disagreements in the investigation over Tobin being Bible John. That said, the anti-Tobin camp appears to have won out. The Tobin theory is now largely confined to amateur circles rather than official theories. Personally, I think John McInnes needs yet another glance with modernized forensic techniques. It's vital to remember that all 3 of the women were young mothers. The authorities may be able to bring significant closure to their now adult children by finally using these modern techniques. 22-year-old Talis Achfat has been missing since the early hours of December 16, 2022. His case has absolutely baffled investigators. There has been no trace of him for nearly 2 years. Talis, a resident of Queensland, Australia, was last seen by his family when he left their home that morning. They have not heard from him since, leading them to heavily suspect foul play. Talis was a student at Spinifex State School, where he was an enthusiastic rugby player. He also worked at a nearby cattle station and was a musician who really enjoyed playing the didgeridoo. Around 3 a.m. on the morning he disappeared, Tallis left his house on Carbonate Street. CCTV footage captured him walking along Alma Street. He crossed a bridge at approximately 3 a.m., just minutes after leaving his home. When friends and family were unable to reach Tallis by December 19th, 3 days after his disappearance, they reported him missing. Despite a comprehensive land and air search, no trace of Tallis or his belongings was ever found. A Mount Isa police spokesperson noted that it is highly unusual for a missing person investigation in the area to remain unsolved for such a long period, especially without any clues or witnesses coming forward. Tallis's phone records showed no activity since his disappearance. His bank accounts have also been entirely inactive. This leads many to believe he did not leave voluntarily, right? His family expressed deep concern for his safety and medical well-being. Publishers actually required daily medication for a condition they did not disclose. Desperate for answers, Tallis's family turned to social media, urging the community to report any sightings or information. They firmly believed his disappearance was suspicious, though investigators stated they had found no evidence of foul play. Despite these assurances, the circumstances surrounding Tallis's disappearance remain extremely unclear. The investigation has completely stalled due to a lack of new leads. Tallis's family continues to hope for his safe return. They keep posting messages on his Facebook account, practically begging him to contact them to alleviate their fears. However, as time passes, the likelihood of resolving his case naturally diminishes. Tallis is described as having dark curly hair, short at the back and sides, with an average build. He stands 5 feet 5 inches tall. He has a distinctive star tattoo under his left eye and an indigenous flag tattoo on his left forearm. At the time of his disappearance, he was wearing an orange, black, and white shirt, black shorts, black shoes, and a maroon bucket hat. Anyone with information about Tallis's disappearance is urged to contact their nearest police station immediately. His family and friends continue to search for answers, holding on to hope that one day they will find out what actually happened to Tallis Affarg. In May 1990, 19-year-old Chad Maurer disappeared from his hometown of Madison, Wisconsin, under mysterious circumstances. He had been on a lunch break from his new job at a bike shop. He left home to return to work, but he never arrived. 2 days later, on May 21st, Chad's body was discovered in his car. It was parked inside an unlocked garage on Chicago's south side, about 150 miles from Madison. Chicago authorities initially reported that Chad died by his own volition, via carbon monoxide poisoning. In support of this, they noted that he was found in the driver's seat with the car's ignition on. The gas tank was empty. The battery was dead. No substances were found in his system, and at first glance, there were no obvious fatal injuries. This lent some credibility to the authorities' initial theory. Chad's shocked parents, however, immediately doubted that their son would do that. He was an upbeat teen with concrete plans to move to Colorado for college. Why would he drive to an unfamiliar Chicago neighborhood to end his life? Their suspicions would soon be bolstered by deeply troubling evidence suggesting Chad's death wasn't voluntary at all. When Chad's parents viewed their son's body at the funeral home, they noticed clear signs of injury that had been overlooked. Chad's knuckles were skinned right down to the bone. He had bruises on his face, indicating he'd been in a fight or physical struggle. The funeral home also noted significant bruising on Chad's lower abdominal area. These findings didn't square with the Chicago police's initial conclusion that there was no evidence of foul play or any trauma on the body. Additionally, Chad's clothing raised massive alarms. His shirt was literally stained with blood, further suggesting a violent altercation. Perhaps most puzzling, crime scene photos showed a jacket in the car that didn't even belong to Chad. He hadn't taken a coat when he left home that cool day, yet there was this unfamiliar jacket resting on the seat next to his body. When the Maurers asked Chicago police to thoroughly examine this jacket, they learned it had gone missing. According to a Chicago detective, the car's window had been broken. Someone apparently stole the jacket before the vehicle could be towed to a secure facility. This complete loss of potential evidence heightened the family's concern that something criminal had occurred. Faced with these glaring inconsistencies, Chad's family urged their local authorities in Wisconsin to get involved. The Dane County coroner examined Chad's body. He found additional injuries that the Chicago coroner hadn't even documented. One critical detail emerged from the autopsy. The level of carbon monoxide in Chad's blood was 74%. Such a high concentration is well above what's typically seen in cases where people do it themselves. This suggested that Chad was entirely unconscious when the car filled with carbon monoxide. In other words, it appeared Chad had been rendered unable to escape and then placed in the car. Confronted with this undeniable evidence of foul play, the Cook County medical examiner changed the manner of death to undetermined in 1991. Authorities finally launched a full, renewed investigation. And of course, by this time, an entire year had passed since Chad's death. A fact which significantly hampered the investigation. You know? With the case reopened, detectives explored exactly how and why Chad Maurer ended up dead in Chicago. An early tip came in October 1990, after Chad's story was featured on a local Crime Stoppers TV segment. A caller alleged that Chad had become involved in a substance deal with some people living in his Madison apartment complex. These specific individuals had recently moved to Madison from Chicago's South Side. Chicago police had intelligence about a substance trafficking pipeline between Chicago and Madison. This naturally raised the possibility that Chad might have been drawn into transporting illicit goods or acting as a driver for people involved in this dangerous trade. One of the detectives who had initially worked on the case theorized that someone could have offered the cash-strapped teen some quick money. Chad had been aggressively trying to save for a move to Colorado. He needed all the funds he could get. This detective speculated that Chad may have been eliminated upon his arrival in Chicago immediately after he completed the delivery. Adding weight to this theory, one of Chad's friends later claimed that in 1989, Chad had been paid on 2 separate occasions to transport a street pharmacist from Madison to Milwaukee. Investigators quickly identified 3 young men as potential suspects, the same individuals who had moved from Chicago to Madison shortly before Chad's death. However, police never found enough hard evidence to formally charge anyone in connection with the crime. Aside from the prevalent substance trafficking theory, several other ideas emerged about what could have happened. However, these theories are all incredibly speculative. They don't appear to be based on any form of evidence whatsoever. For instance, one theory puts forward that he traveled to Chicago for a romantic encounter but was slain by the boyfriend of the girl he was hooking up with. While this is an interesting hypothesis, it's essentially pure fiction, entirely devoid of any connection to the facts of the case. Jessica Zirinsky disappeared on the evening of November 25th, 2022. Despite being spotted on multiple CCTV cameras after her disappearance, these sightings have not brought her family, or the police, any closer to resolving her case. Jessica, who was 30 years old at the time, suffered from health problems. Initially, her family didn't suspect anything was fundamentally wrong. However, after days of absolutely no contact, they finally reported her missing to the police on December 3rd. The police immediately began a public appeal for information. The last known sighting of Jessica occurred around 1 p.m. in the Bossley Park area of Sydney, Australia. According to the missing person report, she was last seen wearing a yellow long-sleeve shirt, black leggings, and flat shoes. The police also released a CCTV image showing Jessica wearing a gray top earlier that exact same day. As part of the investigation, police meticulously reviewed CCTV footage from the surrounding area. 3 days after she was last seen by family and friends, CCTV footage captured Jessica walking in a suburban area of Bossley Park. In this specific footage, she was wearing an orange sleeveless shirt and black leggings. She was first spotted on Zander Avenue at about 8:35 p.m. on November 28th, then outside a club on Prairievale Road at 9:45 p.m. She was seen walking in the opposite direction roughly 5 minutes later. A short clip of this last known sighting was actively released to the public. It shows Jessica confidently walking across a road carrying a cream-colored handbag, a bag which she had not been carrying when friends last saw her 3 days earlier. This puzzling footage only heightened police concerns about Jessica's overall safety. Since her disappearance, no other footage has been located. Jessica did have a history of mental health problems, and erratic behavior was not uncommon for her, but she had never completely disappeared before. She is described as being 5 feet 5 inches tall, with a thin build and long hair. She has tattoos on her right index finger, her left wrist, and the back of her neck. Anyone with information about Jessica Zirinsky's disappearance should contact Fairfield Police or Crime Stoppers at 1-8003-33000. Well, on November 3rd, an 84-year-old woman named Elena Roy vanished. She lived in Fallbrook, California with Chris Catalio. They had been together for 14 years. Actually, they got into an argument that afternoon. Around 1:30 p.m., Elena left their house to take a walk, just to clear her head, Chris expected her back shortly. She didn't return. So he contacted the police to file a missing person report. He told the investigators about her upcoming 84th birthday. Her family was adamant that she just wasn't the type to disappear. Sure, she enjoyed walking, but she always came home after an hour or so. The worrying part, Elena had been showing signs of dementia over the past few years, a major concern for her safety. During the investigation, authorities located some surveillance footage from a local grocery outlet store. It showed Elena inside the building, but the footage was actually captured the day before she went missing. News of her disappearance spread quickly. Hundreds of volunteers jumped in to search Fullbrook and the surrounding areas. Nothing. 60 search and rescue crews combed the region. Even a helicopter was brought in. Still no clues. They monitored her bank accounts for 2 full days, but there was zero activity. It turns out this was entirely normal. Chris was the only one who ever withdrew funds. Elena hadn't touched the account in roughly 2 years. Her family noted how close they were with her. She simply wouldn't stay out of touch without a real reason, right? Naturally, they were frustrated with Chris. He waited until 8:45 that night to call them about the disappearance, basically telling them not to panic. When asked why he delayed the call, his explanation was weak. He claimed he was driving around looking for her and finally decided to reach out when it got dark. The family found it highly suspicious that he let her walk off alone in the first place, especially since he had recently started accompanying her on walks because of her worsening mental state. Chris also admitted he didn't check with anyone in the neighborhood while searching. He didn't want to wake anyone up. It later came to light that a fireman had previously found Elena walking alone by the side of the road. He took her straight to the sheriff's station. When Chris arrived to pick her up, he acted as if he hardly cared, a reaction the fireman found highly unusual. Chris claimed Elena had been distancing herself from her relatives. The family completely denied this. 3 months later, Chris asked a family member to collect her things. When she arrived, she realized he was hosting a garage sale. He was selling off many of Elena's personal belongings. The family was also disturbed by how he spoke about Elena in the past tense. In one interview, he mentioned plans to relocate, stating there was nothing left keeping him in Fullbrook. A $10,000 reward is currently available for information leading to Elena's discovery. Anyone with details can reach the San Diego Sheriff's Department Homicide Unit at 85-8285-6286. Or you can call their anonymous tip line at 888-580-8477. Ellen Wilson was last seen withdrawing money from an ATM on CCTV. Her family? They are no closer to discovering what happened in this bizarre missing person case. The last time anyone actually laid eyes on Ellen was the evening of September 11th, 2015. She had spent time at the Australian Hotel. That's a pub located in Ballina, Australia. It is unclear whether she had been drinking. It is believed she drove away in her silver Subaru station wagon. What happened next remains an unsolved mystery. Ellen became a formal missing person after missing a scheduled meeting the following day. Earlier on the day of her disappearance, she spoke with a friend to discuss upcoming volunteer work. Simply not showing up was completely out of character. When friends couldn't reach her, they called the police. Like in many missing person investigations, authorities turned to CCTV footage for answers. Ellen was captured on video in Lismore. Reports indicated this recording happened the day after her pub visit. However, still images released from that footage bore a timestamp of November 11th. There were also scattered reports of her car being spotted in the area over the next few months. None were ever corroborated. Neither Ellen nor her Subaru has ever been found. Police discovered no evidence of foul play. They couldn't rule it out, though. The timeline here is critical. If that CCTV footage was recorded on the day she vanished, Ellen likely disappeared on her drive home from the pub. The Australian Hotel sits very close to the Richmond River, so it's possible an accident caused her to end up in the water. But if the footage was from the next day, well, something might have occurred between Lismore and Ballina. Ellen remains listed as a missing person. Her case is totally unsolved. She is described as Caucasian with light brown hair and blue eyes. She wears glasses. Her vehicle registration was CB76QX. Anyone holding information that could help resolve this unexplained disappearance should contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000. In the early hours of October 15, 2016, a 26-year-old woman named Katie Jones was walking home. Tragically, she was shot and killed. Katie worked as a waitress at the Midwood Smokehouse down in Charlotte, North Carolina. She had been hanging out with friends in the Plaza Midwood neighborhood. It's a trendy district known for its vibrant nightlife. As the evening wound down, Katie began her walk home alone. She followed her standard route down the 1300 block of the plaza, heading toward Central Avenue. Her friends pointed out that walking home late wasn't unusual for her. She lived just a mile from the Midwood Country Club, which was the bar they visited that night. At 2 a.m., Katie was roughly halfway home. Suddenly, an unknown assailant shot her in the chest. Her body was found a short time later in the driveway of a local real estate business. A resident heard the gunshot and called the police. They arrived too late. The Charlotte Police Department's most promising lead comes from surveillance footage. A camera mounted on a church across the street captured about a minute of Katie walking by. Shortly after she steps out of the frame, a car slowly follows her path. Investigators believe Katie interacted with the people inside that vehicle. They are convinced those occupants are responsible for her murder. Some people speculate this was a botched robbery, but Katie was carrying pepper spray. She was walking in a well-lit area, and absolutely nothing was stolen from her. Her phone and purse were left behind. Other theories lean toward gang violence, like maybe this was part of an initiation rite. Meanwhile, some of her friends think the crime was far from random. They suggest someone offered her a ride home. She declined. That rejection potentially triggered the fatal violence. Despite these different theories, the case sits unsolved today. There are no current suspects. Katie's mother, Giovanna Livingston, has decided to focus entirely on her daughter's life rather than the tragedy of her death. To honor Katie, her friends and family created a scholarship at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Katie had been forced to pause her education due to financial struggles. Basically, the scholarship aims to support others facing those exact same hurdles. As Livingston explained, Katie couldn't stay in college because she lacked the necessary funding. So for her to help somebody else achieve that goal, that would mean everything to her. Rona Louise Moneson was an 18-year-old college freshman in 1972. She attended the University of South Florida. Originally from Long Island, New York, she relocated to Tampa for her studies. She lived in a standard campus dormitory. On the morning of October 2nd, 1972, Rona told her friends she was running an errand at a nearby store. She promised to be back shortly. She drove away in her gray Chevrolet Impala. She never returned to her room. When Rona failed to come back or even call, her friends grew incredibly anxious. It quickly became obvious that the young student had completely vanished. Investigators were left baffled. How does a simple trip to the store result in a total disappearance? For 3 long days, authorities and friends frantically searched for her. Their absolute worst fears became reality on October 5th. Rona's lifeless body was discovered in a secluded pond. It was located about half a mile north of Skipper Road and 30th Street, sitting just outside the USF campus boundaries. An autopsy confirmed the grim details. She had died from blunt force trauma during a brutal assault. The specific location of her body indicated the killer went to significant lengths to conceal the crime. They dumped her in a remote pond. Rona's car turned up abandoned in the parking lot of a nearby apartment complex. This just added another dense layer to the mystery. Investigators thoroughly processed the Impala. Whatever evidence they uncovered simply wasn't enough to point to a suspect. The police refrained from publicly naming any persons of interest. There was no obvious motive, no signs of a robbery, no known personal vendettas. With so many lingering questions, multiple theories regarding Rona's fate have surfaced over the decades. One prominent idea is that Rona fell victim to a completely random encounter. A violent stranger. She went missing during a mundane daytime errand, and with zero immediate suspects, it points heavily toward an opportunistic predator. This theory assumes a stranger abducted her near the store, or perhaps they intercepted her drive. They inflicted the fatal injuries and then discarded her body in the water. Others have speculated about someone she actually knew, maybe a fellow student. An acquaintance from the local area could have easily lured or coerced her. Given the specific time frame, some experts wonder if her slaying connects to other unsolved cases. Serial offenders were highly active in Florida during the early 1970s. Her murder happened just weeks after the unsolved abduction of a 13-year-old girl named Gail Joyner in that exact same region. Could a single offender be responsible for both tragedies? Those who back this theory often point to Gerald Stano. He was a relatively obscure but incredibly prolific offender who might have committed the crime. Despite all these compelling theories, investigators have never officially confirmed a single suspect, or a concrete motive for that matter. The case remains completely open. Okay guys, welcome back. Today's going to be a bit different. I'm finishing my final run of Minecraft, so I decided to talk about some bizarre and unexplained mysteries around the internet. Do write in the comments if you like this format, because I'll change it if it doesn't suit you. And yeah, sit back. Let's go. Sherry Anderson was extremely close to her loving family. She absolutely adored her two young grandsons. When December finally arrived, her thoughts naturally turned toward cheerful Christmas preparations. However, for her family and friends, the holiday season now exclusively brings a deeply painful reminder of her completely unsolved disappearance. Sherry was last physically seen on December 2nd, 2000. She casually walked out of her home in Stanwood, Washington at precisely 9 o'clock that morning. The night prior, she had happily discussed her daily plans with her adult daughter. She fully intended to go to McDonald's to quickly grab breakfast. Then, she planned to pick up some photos she had previously sent out to be professionally developed. She would visit Walmart and then finally stop by the busy Everett Mall. She firmly promised her husband, John, that she would be definitively back home by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They had concrete plans for a nice dinner together. John ended up completely falling asleep that quiet afternoon. He slowly woke up at 5:30 in the evening to find Sherry still was not home. He quickly called Sherry's friend, genuinely thinking she might just be visiting there. The friend had not seen or even heard from her at all. After frantically contacting several other friends and extended family members, a highly coordinated search officially began at 9 o'clock that evening. A close friend actually found Sherry's parked car sitting totally abandoned outside the Everett Mall. There were absolutely no Christmas presents located inside the locked vehicle. This heavily suggested that whatever happened to her likely occurred before she returned to her car with her shopping bags. Sherry's personal purse and the defensive weapon she legally carried for protection were both found sitting untouched inside the vehicle. To her entire family, it seemed factually impossible that Sherry would ever disappear voluntarily. She was a highly dependable, dedicated social worker. There had been absolutely no activity on her personal bank account since the exact moment of her disappearance. Family and friends aggressively took the firm lead in the investigation. They scoured local pawn shops, desperately searching for the specific jewelry Sherry was wearing when she vanished into thin air. She had a highly custom-designed wedding ring, beautifully featured a diamond flanked by black onyx, deeply set in pristine white gold. There was absolutely no sign of the distinctive ring in any local stores whatsoever. There has been zero physical trace of Sherry since her disappearance. John eventually filed for a legal divorce a full year later. He explicitly stated that he simply needed to move on with his life. The rest of the deeply shattered family has stubbornly continued to relentlessly search for answers. Sherry was exactly 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed 130 pounds when she vanished. On June 5th, 1991, a grim discovery was made. Well, a security guard working the shift at a Super 8 motel near Interstates 40 and 25 in New Mexico decided to physically check on room 233. The occupants had long since failed to check out as scheduled. They were absolutely supposed to be gone by that morning. The room was actually rented 2 days prior on June 3rd. A man using the name Eduardo Collin reserved the specific space for 2 people just for a single night. When motel staff finally opened the heavy door, they walked into a deeply unsettling scene. A woman was hanging directly from the bathroom shower head. Multiple empty alcohol bottles cluttered the immediate space. No signs of a physical struggle were immediately apparent to the workers, right? Local police quickly responded to the scene. The tragic death was initially treated as a solitary act she undertook entirely by herself. The body was already in an advanced state of decomposition. Warm June temperatures had actively swept through the local area. The room's air conditioning unit was switched entirely off. This heavily suggested she died very shortly after stepping foot inside the rented motel room, on the very night she arrived. There was no physical identification found with the body. Her personal belongings offered 0 names. She was immediately registered as a Jane Doe. In time, a crucial tip finally surfaced in 2021. She became informally known to the public as Becca. Investigators firmly believe this might actually be her real first name. The unidentified woman was officially described as a white or Hispanic female. She was somewhere between 25 and 35 years old. She stood about 5 feet 7 inches tall, weighing in around 140 pounds. Like, she had this long, distinctly curly, strawberry blonde hair and hazel gray eyes. Her ears were visibly pierced. She had absolutely no tattoos or distinguishing scars, just some minor abrasions located on her face and leg. A subsequent autopsy revealed heroin present in her system. The medical examiner noted the substance level was not inherently lethal. Well, unless she had never actually used the narcotic drug before, the official cause of death remained asphyxiation by hanging. At the scene itself, investigators cataloged several personal items. They desperately hoped these would offer concrete clues to her true identity. One of the absolute most haunting pieces of evidence was a small photo booth picture. It was just sitting openly on a table in the room. The photo clearly showed the unidentified woman smiling brightly alongside an unknown adult man. Motel employees believed the man in the picture was the exact same person who checked in with her, Eduardo Collin. They logically assumed the photo was possibly taken at a local shopping mall shortly before she died. In addition to the photograph, a small weighing scale was found on that same table. The name George Martinez was scribbled roughly across it. Given the surrounding circumstantial evidence, investigators strongly suspected the scale was utilized for less than legitimate narcotic purposes. It remained completely unclear who George Martinez actually was, or if that name was simply a fake alias. I mean, George Martinez is not exactly the most distinctive or rare name in the state of New Mexico. Identifying her proved incredibly difficult despite these scattered items and a very clear photograph of her face. In 1991, her fingerprints and dental record were collected by the coroner. They were extensively compared against vast national databases. No match was found anywhere. DNA profiling was not a standard, widespread procedure at the time. Later modern efforts were severely hampered by the unfortunate fact that her physical remains were reportedly cremated. This left only minimal biological samples available for testing. Some of the preserved physical evidence from the crime scene likely still contains her genetic DNA. From the very outset, detectives faced two massive central mysteries. Who was this young woman? How exactly did she meet her tragic end? Detectives naturally wondered why someone actively traveling with a companion would end up dying completely alone, with absolutely no one reporting her sudden passing. Eduardo was the only verified name authorities had to actively work with. He was immediately considered a primary person of interest. Police are entirely unsure whether Eduardo was simply a terrified witness who fled out of fear, or someone who might have played a direct, physical role in the Jane Doe's final fate. If the death was indeed by her own hand, Eduardo could potentially provide much-needed context about her mental state of mind. If there was any genuine suspicion of foul play, he would naturally be the prime suspect. Tracking him down proved to be a colossal, frustrating challenge. The specific information he provided when signing into the motel registry was partially false. He did provide his real name. He gave a proper local mailing address. He listed a completely false license plate number for his vehicle, though. Years later, police eventually located his extended family. They quickly learned he had allegedly died of natural causes in the interim. It is quite difficult to firmly confirm whether the authorities had absolute independent confirmation that Eduardo actually passed away. Reading the official reports heavily suggests that is the factual case. Another bizarre mystery reared its head when the family was physically shown the recovered photograph. The picture authorities believed depicted the Jane Doe sitting with Eduardo. When explicitly shown the photo booth picture of Becca and the unknown man, Eduardo's relatives were completely adamant. They insisted the man was undeniably not Eduardo. They did not recognize the smiling woman at all. This family claim cast heavy doubt on the motel staff's previous eyewitness identification of the male subject. It is highly possible the motel employees were simply mistaken. They only thought Eduardo very briefly in the lobby. Perhaps the family was just incredibly unwilling to admit his involvement, even if he was deceased. A massive turn of events arrived in March 2021. A brand new tip completely revitalized the cold investigation. According to Albuquerque police detectives, an individual came forward with striking information. They suggested the unknown woman went by the name Becca. They claimed she was originally from the Los Angeles area. At present, the historic case appears to be at a complete standstill. It is currently unclear if authorities have been able to successfully extract a usable DNA profile, or if they have officially retained a genetic genealogy company to help track down living relatives. Even if there is actually no usable DNA left, there is a very good chance of eventually solving this case. We have a crystal clear photograph of her face. This case basically just needs significantly more publicity and widespread media exposure for Becca's true identity to be permanently restored. The rather unusual facial expression she is making in the picture is something of a double-edged sword. It is a highly positive thing in the sense that her photograph naturally attracts people to her story and generates more viral exposure. The downside is that investigators do not have a standard photograph of her with a neutral expression to officially distribute alongside it. For well over a month, the terrified family and friends of Matthew Dillon have been desperately searching for concrete answers. His sudden, unexplained disappearance on January 2nd, 2023, left everyone completely shattered. Their exhaustive quest took a deeply perplexing turn recently. Recovered CCTV footage revealed Matthew casually walking around in York. This is a city located 100 miles away from his permanent home in South Liverpool. Matthew is exactly 46 years old. He was last seen physically leaving his home in Moseley Hill, Liverpool, where he quietly lived with his father. The freezing morning of his disappearance seemed entirely ordinary. When his father casually inquired about his plans for the day, Matthew simply mentioned it was a nice day outside. He explicitly said he might visit Southport. That is a journey that would take approximately 90 minutes by riding public transport. Later that same afternoon, Matthew sent his father a quick WhatsApp message. He stated he would definitively be home by around 10:30 at night, assuming his scheduled bus was on time. His father lovingly responded with a simple message telling him to take care. The text was marked as read by the application at 10:29 at night. This heavily suggested Matthew was almost home. However, 20 agonizing minutes passed without any physical sign of him. His father sent a follow-up text message at 10:50 at night, stubbornly remained undelivered. Matthew either turned off his mobile phone intentionally or he entirely lost local internet access. When Matthew did not walk through the door that night, his terrified family immediately reported him missing to the local police. The initial search grid focused heavily on Liverpool and Southport. Urgent public appeals for any information were circulated widely across various social media platforms. Despite all these extensive efforts, there was absolutely no physical trace of Matthew in either location. The ongoing investigation took an unexpected, jarring turn when reports surfaced of Matthew being seen in York. Eyewitnesses loudly claimed to have spotted him sitting inside a local pub. This was actually a familiar setting for Matthew. He had happily visited York pubs in the past. It was highly unusual for him to undertake such a massive journey without informing anyone, right? If he had indeed traveled directly from Southport to York, the long trip would have taken well over 3 hours. It would have logically required him to pass straight back through Liverpool. Matthew was reportedly seen in York on January 3rd and January 4th. He appeared visibly calm. He was not exhibiting any unusual or erratic behavior whatsoever. The absolute confirmed sighting occurred on the cold morning of January 5th. CCTV footage perfectly captured him standing at the busy York train station. He was still wearing the exact same clothes he had on when he left his home in Liverpool, 3 full days earlier. A heavy blue jacket, a dark-colored winter beanie, a simple messenger bag. Matthew is described as a white male of notably large build. He has short, sandy hair and routinely wears glasses. When Catherine Ackling, Brian did not show up to pick her 2 daughters up from their school, her husband Michael immediately grew frantic. Within just half an hour of her scheduled arrival, she was officially reported missing to the local authorities. Michael soon uncovered that Catherine had been acting incredibly oddly all day long. That morning, Catherine took her daughters to school in a highly unusual, frazzled state. Her younger daughter was actually still dressed in her pajamas. This was an absolute first for the family. It stemmed directly from an accident the child had the previous day due to a sudden physical illness. Initially, Catherine had firmly planned to keep her sick daughter home. She inexplicably changed her mind at the very last minute, however. After dropping off the children, Catherine briefly returned home at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. She ate or dropped off some specific items at the school before actively taking a public bus to a local shopping center. CCTV footage properly recovered from St. Mary Village Center clearly showed her visiting a Target store. She bought fresh, clean clothes for her daughters there. At precisely 12:17 in the afternoon, she was actively seen walking out of the shopping center. What exactly happened after Catherine left the busy mall remains a haunting, unresolved mystery. No further security footage of her was ever found anywhere. It is widely believed she safely returned home. The new clothes were discovered sitting neatly there inside the house, and she had meticulously prepared a family meal in a slow cooker. By 3:30 in the afternoon, Catherine had vanished without a single trace. When the school called Michael, he initially brushed it off as a simple mistake. He genuinely thought she might have just overslept during an afternoon nap. Upon physically checking the house, he found it completely empty. Her phone and purse were left behind on a kitchen counter. Her house keys were missing entirely. The police launched an immediate, massive investigation into her highly sudden disappearance. Over the following year, multiple desperate public appeals for information were made by local officials and Catherine's frantic family. Despite all these incredibly extensive efforts, no additional CCTV footage ever surfaced. No reliable witnesses stepped forward to confidently offer clues. Authorities actually do not suspect any foul play in Catherine's disappearance. She did have a heavily documented history of mental health issues. She was under significant, crushing stress at the specific time. This was particularly due to her young daughter's recent severe illness, which had visibly upset her for several days. During the morning walk to the school, her children actively noticed she had heavy tears welling up in her eyes. Catherine's heartbroken family strongly believe she is simply no longer alive today. Her physical body has never been found anywhere. As a direct result, her tragic disappearance remains completely, frustratingly unresolved. In May 2004, one of the absolute most peculiar mysteries in Formula One racing history unfolded on the twisting streets of Monaco. The Jaguar racing team had taken an unprecedented, highly controversial step. They firmly mounted a massive, incredibly valuable diamond directly onto the nose cone of the Formula One race car. This was explicitly part of a glitzy promotional stunt occurring during the famous Monaco Grand Prix. A sudden, violent crash sent that precious jewel flying into the dirt. It sparked a bizarre mystery that has stubbornly gone on for more than 2 decades. The wild decision to put a diamond on a race car was born purely out of a high-profile corporate marketing partnership. Jaguar's Formula One team was under immense crushing pressure to aggressively increase its global profile. They desperately needed to please their corporate sponsors, so they struck a massive deal to heavily promote the Hollywood heist film Ocean's 12 during the prestigious Monaco Grand Prix. Monaco's race is known worldwide for intense glamour and high celebrity attendance. It was seen as the absolute perfect stage for an attention-grabbing viral stunt. Jaguar collaborated directly with an international diamond company. This wealthy firm provided a set of utterly flawless diamonds to be actively used over the chaotic race weekend. Each Jaguar car would aggressively carry one of these gems embedded right in its nose cone during the Grand Prix. These were absolutely no fake glass crystals. They were definitely not low-value film props. Each stone was a genuine, flawless diamond valued at around $250,000 at the time. Using real jewels was highly intentional by the marketing team. The massive financial risk was a core part of the global appeal. Having a costly gem strapped to the very front of a vehicle traveling at blistering speeds added real, tangible jeopardy to the movie promotion. Not surprisingly, absolutely no insurer on Earth would logically underwrite such a chaotic stunt. Jaguar publicly acknowledged that potentially losing the diamond was a calculated risk they had fully accepted from the very start. With the entire world's attention firmly focused on Monaco, the stage was perfectly set. It was poised to be either a massive, unintentional publicity coup or an incredibly costly corporate misadventure. Essentially acting as a mere passenger at that terrifying point, Klein went straight ahead and slammed nose first into a dense barrier. The violent impact ended his race on the very first lap. The car's nose cone, carrying the priceless diamond, was buried deeply into the heavy tire wall. Circuit marshals quickly moved in under yellow flags to safely clear the wreck from the active track. Klein was completely uninjured. Jaguar's bold PR jewel, however, was now in severe jeopardy. Immediately, Jaguar team members and management were deeply panicked. Not on that with their driver's physical health, they were completely frantic about the unknown fate of the precious, completely uninsured stone. Notably, one of the Jaguar managers is firmly on record saying his immediate gut concern was actually for the diamond. He was not focused on Klein. That is a heck of a thing to admit publicly. Strict racing safety regulations prevented the team from actively joining the trackside recovery during the race. The shattered race car was simply hoisted away by a large crane. The deafening race simply continued on around them. Jaguar anxiously awaited the chance to closely inspect the damaged nose. Now, it was only after the Grand Prix had completely finished, roughly 2 hours later, that Jaguar personnel finally accessed the retrieved car. To their absolute dismay, the diamond was nowhere to be found. The massive gemstone had been securely fastened into the carbon fiber nose cone before the race. It had vanished completely at some point during the crash and its highly chaotic aftermath. News of the missing $250,000 gem quickly made massive global headlines. It added a highly dramatic twist to Jaguar's promotional gamble. Curious spectators standing near the crash site reportedly scoured the immediate area in the direct aftermath. They were desperately hoping to spot the glittering prize sitting in the dirt. With the Jaguar diamond officially listed as missing, several distinct theories emerged. People aggressively wanted to explain what might have actually happened to it. One totally straightforward possibility is that the diamond was simply lost in the brutal crash, never to be recovered. No malicious foul play involved whatsoever. The extreme impact at the tire barrier could have easily dislodged the diamond, sending it flying blindly into an area where it was effectively irretrievable by human hands. In that highly plausible scenario, the small gem could have been totally overlooked amid the twisted carbon fiber debris. It might have quietly ended up swept aside with other shattered car parts when the track was thoroughly cleaned. It could have potentially ended up in a local trash bin. The absolute most popular theory is quite a bit darker. It is the exact one initially assumed by Jaguar's own management team. Someone at the scene simply picked up the diamond and selfishly decided to keep it. A Formula One crash draws plenty of immediate curious eyes. Monaco's track is tightly lined with spectators and working marshals in incredibly close physical proximity. When Klein crashed, heavy pieces of his car scattered everywhere. This included that specific nose tip housing the diamond. A quick-thinking track marshal or a highly enterprising spectator could have easily spotted the glittering stone. They could have quickly pocketed it before race officials even knew it was permanently gone. Given the extreme monetary value of the diamond, such a finder would have immense incentive to keep it a complete secret. They could perhaps carefully sell it quietly at a much later date. There were literally hundreds of people standing in the vicinity that chaotic day. Any single one of them might have picked up a tiny gem without being noticed by the television cameras. Despite the incredibly strong likelihood of an opportunistic grab, absolutely no culprit has ever come forward. The missing jewel has never been officially traced or recovered. The bold theft theory naturally remains entirely unproven. It is very much alive in racing fans' minds, though. Another intense line of speculation exists. The disappearance was not entirely a random accident or an opportunistic theft by a bystander. It actively involved some inside knowledge or corporate planning. One version of this theory firmly suggests Jaguar and its corporate partners might not have been as totally reckless as they appeared. Under this specific theory, when they could not obtain financial insurance for the stone, they quietly put on a cheap replica diamond. This replica obviously lacked the physical hardness and other structural qualities of an actual diamond. It may have simply shattered into fine dust during the high-speed incident. Loud supporters of this theory deeply question why race officials would have ever allowed Jaguar to affix an ultra-hard small projectile to the nose cone to begin with. Perhaps the most far-out theory of all involves pure calculated marketing. Jaguar purposely put a fake diamond on the nose cone of a rookie driver. They knew full well that he was exponentially far more likely to crash than a seasoned veteran driver. Under this theory, the real PR stunt was never putting the diamond on the vehicle. The actual stunt was the explosive, sustained media coverage surrounding the highly publicized loss of the diamond itself. Alright, I need to confess something. I'm currently in my nostalgia phase, playing old games I grew up with. Turn my PS1 for one of the best horrors I played so far, Silent Hill 1. I didn't saw this type of videos on YouTube so far, so I'll see how this one will work out. In any case, here's me talking about unsolved mysteries to fall asleep to. The morning of August 9th, 2018 brought a devastating tragedy. 63-year-old Susan Rainwater was quietly cycling alone. She traveled along an isolated stretch of road winding through rural Washington state. The location was roughly 60 miles straight south of the city of Seattle. Without warning, she was violently struck and subsequently killed by a speeding vehicle. The driver of the automobile never bothered to apply the brakes. They never stopped to check on the victim. They certainly never contacted emergency services to report the fatal collision. Several long hours would pass before a random passerby finally noticed Susan's mangled bicycle discarded in a muddy ditch. Her lifeless body was eventually discovered lying hundreds of feet away from the initial point of impact. Investigating officers initially possessed remarkably little physical evidence to build a case. Absolutely no eyewitnesses were present to observe the fleeing driver's face or record a license plate number. Useful CCTV footage was entirely non-existent in that remote rural area. The sole piece of physical evidence abandoned at the violent crime scene consisted of a single object. It was a jagged slab of black plastic. The fragment was roughly the size of a standard smartphone. The piece had violently snapped off the suspect's vehicle during the exact moment they collided with Susan. Lacking any immediate actionable leads, Washington State Patrol Trooper Jonah Baptiste made a highly unconventional decision. She opted to crowdsource the complex detective work. She carefully photographed the jagged plastic fragment. The image was subsequently uploaded to the internet, accompanied by a public plea asking if anyone could possibly identify its origin. By August 10th, the digital photograph found its way onto a specific subsection of Reddit known as r/What Is This Thing? This particular digital forum is dedicated to users submitting images of mysterious objects for the community to collectively identify. The post rapidly accumulated massive attention. Hundreds of eager Redditors quickly flooded the comments section to offer their own personal suggestions. The vast majority of these replies amounted to little more than moderately educated guesses. One user theorized it resembled a piece of standard trim found on the bottom rocker beneath a car door. Another assumed the fragment originated from the front end of a vehicle, guessing it was part of a bumper assembly located near a headlight wiper. A different commenter suggested it merely looked like cheap, gray plastic painted black, perhaps serving as a decorative license plate holder or similar cosmetic junk. Eventually, a respectable handful of users correctly identified the damaged chunk as originating from a vehicle's headlight bezel. Very few, however, were able to provide any concrete specifics. That is, until one particular user entered the chat. Operating under the crude username Jeff Snuts, this individual firmly claimed the broken fragment was definitively part of a headlamp bezel. He traced it to a late 1980s Chevrolet pickup truck. More specifically, he confidently identified the part as belonging to a 1988 Chevrolet Silverado. To validate his incredibly precise claim, he uploaded detailed comparison photographs. These images clearly highlighted a small, highly distinctive notch molded directly into the plastic structure. A notch he insisted was entirely unique to that specific automotive design. I mean, the public desperately wanted to comprehend how anyone could possibly identify the exact make, specific model, and approximate manufacturing year of a fleeing vehicle from such a generic, ordinary-looking piece of broken plastic. According to his own explanation, Jeff had previously enjoyed a career working as an official state vehicle inspector operating in Maryland. A major component of his daily responsibilities involved executing mandatory headlamp inspections and precise alignments. Consequently, he had spent countless grueling hours staring directly at this exact mechanical part attached to these exact trucks. Having examined the identical component day after day for several consecutive years, he did not even have to consciously analyze the plastic fragment in the photograph. He simply recognized its shape on pure instinct. The exact right person, possessing the precise niche expertise required for this impossible task, just so happened to be casually scrolling through the subreddit at the exact perfect moment, right? Law enforcement investigators desperately wanted to apprehend the perpetrator before they had adequate time to hide their tracks or repair their damaged vehicle. They took Jeff's online post extremely seriously. Instead of hopelessly searching for virtually any damaged vehicle scattered across the entire Pacific Northwest region, they dramatically narrowed their focus. They concentrated their search efforts on a much smaller pool of late 1980s Chevrolet pickup trucks. When combined with an anonymous tip received by authorities shortly afterward, Jeff's crucial lead ultimately helped detectives successfully locate the hidden vehicle. They quickly moved to arrest the primary suspect. A man named Jeremy Thomas Simon was taken into police custody. During interrogation, Simon offered a hollow explanation. He claimed that on the tragic morning of the incident, he had simply fallen asleep while behind the steering wheel. He stated he genuinely believed he had merely struck a roadside mailbox. He admitted to fleeing the scene only after noticing the twisted wreckage of the bicycle. According to his official statement, he fled because he did not want to see a dead body. In January of the year 2019, Simon officially pleaded guilty to charges of vehicular homicide. Additional charges included hit and run alongside the illegal possession of heroin. The actual reason behind his sudden bout of exhaustion behind the wheel was no longer a mystery. As a direct result of a negotiated plea agreement, a judge sentenced him to just 4.5 years in the system. Half of this mandated time was to be served inside a state prison facility. The remaining half was to be completed on supervised probation. Virtually overnight, the Reddit user known as Jeff became a certified internet legend. Global news outlets eagerly reported the sensational story that an online forum had successfully solved a fatal hit and run. Far more important to Jeff than accumulating meaningless internet karma, however, was a much deeper realization. He had directly assisted Susan's grieving family in finding some small semblance of actual justice and closure. In a subsequent interview provided to The Drive, he admitted he did not fully comprehend the immense seriousness of his contribution until several hours after publishing the initial post. He explained that it was not until he read a private message sent from a friend of the deceased that reality set in. The message detailed exactly how utterly distraught the victim's family was. They profusely thanked him for his invaluable assistance. Only then did he realize the real-world impact of his digital actions. A human being was dead. The perpetrator would have likely evaded justice entirely. The sheer randomness of someone posting the link, combined with his presence online at that exact millisecond, changed the course of the investigation. It is remarkably easy to dismiss obscure, hyper-specific knowledge as nothing more than useless trivia, the type of information you might occasionally pull out at a local pub quiz night to impress friends. Yet, every so often, a person's oddly specific life experience turns out to be exactly the key and impossible investigation desperately required. In 1989, 23-year-old Adam Hecht, the son of a prominent Hollywood film producer, mysteriously vanished from Beverly Hills. He was last seen on June 7, 1989, driving away from his home in a rented car while his personal vehicle was undergoing repairs in a local shop. Adam Hecht grew up in a wealthy Beverly Hills family with ties to Hollywood royalty. His father, Harold Hecht, was a highly acclaimed movie producer whose filmography stands as a major legacy in cinema history. Adam, then in his early 20s, was working as a tennis instructor. In early 1989, Adam befriended a homeless man known only as Tony and shocked his family by inviting Tony to live inside his apartment. Adam had grown deeply disillusioned with his privileged lifestyle. Under Tony's influence, he developed a growing interest in meditation and mysticism. Soon, Adam was spending nights among the local homeless population, much to the shock and concern of his wealthy friends and family. By June 1989, Adam's loved ones were growing increasingly worried. On June 7th, he drove off in a rental car and never returned. After several days with zero contact, his family reported him missing to the Beverly Hills Police Department. When Adam's brother went to check the apartment, Tony was there alone and could offer no explanation for Adam's whereabouts. Police questioned Tony, but he insisted he knew nothing about what had happened, simply maintaining that Adam was nowhere to be found. A few weeks later, Adam's rental car was discovered abandoned on a Beverly Hills street. It had accumulated multiple parking tickets on the windshield, yet the keys remained right in the ignition. Inside sat Adam's wallet, driver's license, cash, and credit cards, but not a single clue regarding his ultimate fate. No further trace of Adam has ever been found, despite extensive search efforts. With no physical evidence pointing to a violent crime, police could only treat the case as a missing person matter rather than a homicide. Adam's family, however, insisted he would never leave voluntarily. His brother emphasized that vanishing without a word was completely out of character for him. With no solid leads to follow, the case eventually went cold, although it officially remains open pending any new information. Two main theories have emerged regarding what happened to Adam Hecht. One theory suggests he left voluntarily to start a completely new life. Disillusioned with his privileged upbringing, Adam may have deliberately vanished to live among the homeless population or to pursue a deeper spiritual path. His keen interest in meditation and his willingness to abandon a wallet filled with cash lend credence to this idea. In fact, some analysts have suggested that leaving his keys in the ignition and his wallet untouched served as a conscious symbolic gesture of shedding his life of easy material wealth. Even police acknowledged the distinct possibility that Adam simply decided never to return. The other theory proposes that Adam met with foul play. His family suspects that Tony or another individual may have harmed him. Tony's odd behavior and a cryptic remark he made later fueled the suspicion. Roughly 1 year after the disappearance, one of Adam's family members encountered Tony and asked directly if he knew anything. Tony replied that if the family member, quote, stayed on the streets long enough, he would find out what happened to Adam. Some interpreted this statement to mean that Adam was slain by someone among the homeless community he had joined. Others, however, believe it indicated that Adam was alive and well, living on the streets and completely rejecting his privileged past. Without contact and new evidence for decades, determine Adam's fate remains elusive. Observers and investigators have considered foul play to be a strong possibility given his sudden disappearance, though no physical proof supports a fatal outcome. Alternatively, it remains possible that he suffered a mental break or entered a dissociative fugue state, leaving his past behind permanently. Well, in late April 1981, a group of young men made a grim discovery along a rural road in Newton Township near Troy, Ohio. They found the body of a young woman lying right in a ditch, clad in jeans, a turtleneck sweater, and, a very distinctive tasseled buckskin poncho. Notably, the victim was completely barefoot and carried no identification on her person, which made immediate identification impossible. So, local police were called to the scene, and an official investigation into the young woman's death began right away. An autopsy later revealed that the woman had been brutally slain. She had suffered severe blunt force trauma to her head and neck, and then, she was strangled, likely about 2 days before her body was found. The medical examiner also noted a laceration on her liver, consistent with a violent assault. Importantly, and actually quite surprisingly to initial investigators, there were no signs of any illicit assault on the victim. The young woman appeared to be in her late teens or early 20s, with reddish-brown hair neatly braided into pigtails. Further, she had very well cared-for teeth, indicating that she likely enjoyed a good upbringing. Basically, these details painted a perplexing picture for detectives. The victim, clearly slain, didn't fit the typical profile of a transient person living on the streets, yet no one knew who she was. With no name to call her, investigators and the media gave the unidentified victim a nickname based on her clothing. The fringed suede poncho she wore led to her being dubbed the Buckskin Girl, and she quickly became one of the most famous Jane Doe cases in the country. From the outset, Ohio authorities worked diligently to identify the victim. Because the body was found relatively soon after death, police were able to take her fingerprints and dental record for comparison. However, back in 1981, there were limited computer databases available. Her prints matched no criminal record, while her dental information failed to match any known missing persons reports. Investigators also released a composite sketch of the young woman's face to newspapers and television stations in hopes that someone would recognize her. These efforts generated around 200 tips in the weeks following the slaying, but unfortunately, none of them panned out. As time went on, the case grew cold. However, it was never forgotten. The authorities preserved all the physical evidence from the crime scene in remarkably good condition. This included the victim's clothing along with samples of her blood, holding on to the hope that future technological advances might break the case wide open. In 2001, they were able to generate a full DNA profile of the victim from the preserved blood sample. Then, in 2008, the Buckskin Girl was entered into the newly created National Missing and Unidentified Persons System database, becoming one of the very first cases to be included there. In 2016, investigators performed isotope analysis on the victim's hair and a detailed pollen analysis on her clothing, aiming to learn where she had been in the days and months before her death. These tests suggested intriguing details. Buckskin Girl had likely spent a significant amount of time in the southwestern United States shortly before she died. Conversely, pollen found on her shirt and inner clothing pointed to extended time spent in the northeastern United States or Canada during the year prior to her death. This lined up with the theory that she was a transient or hitchhiker who traveled long distances across the country. The victim's clean bare feet at the crime scene also supported the idea that she hadn't walked to the dump site herself. So police believed she was slain elsewhere, perhaps indoors or inside a vehicle, and her body was left beside the Ohio road not long after her death. The major breakthrough in the Buckskin Girl case finally came nearly 37 years after the act. By 2018, a new forensic method, genetic genealogy, had emerged. This allowed investigators to identify victims or suspects by matching DNA to distant relatives through public genealogical databases. Miami County authorities partnered with a volunteer organization, the DNA Doe Project, to apply this technique. Using the blood sample preserved from 1981, forensic scientists obtained a high-quality DNA profile of the victim and uploaded it to a public genealogy database. In March 2018, within only a few hours of analysis, genealogists found a potential family connection. In early April 2018, the Miami Valley Regional Crime Laboratory confirmed the identification by obtaining DNA from a relative of the missing woman and comparing it directly to the victim. In a press conference held on April 11, 2018, authorities officially announced that the Buckskin Girl had been identified as Marcia King, a 21-year-old woman from Arkansas. Marcia King had last been seen by her family back in 1980 when she left home in Little Rock and traveled out of state. Because she was an adult and no one suspected she was in immediate danger, her family had never filed an official missing persons report. Marcia King's identification was groundbreaking for law enforcement. She was one of the first unidentified victims ever identified through forensic genetic genealogy technique that would soon become famous for helping solve countless other cold cases. Marcia's family, who had quietly hoped for her return for years, finally had closure about her fate, even if it was a sad confirmation of her death. In Ohio, the generic Jane Doe headstone at her grave was replaced with a new marker bearing Marcia's real name, and a memorial service was held where local residents and officers paid their respects. The identification also renewed energy in the homicide investigation. Knowing Marcia's identity gave detectives fresh leads about where she had been and who she associated with. Even with Marcia King's identity known, the question of who ended her life remains unanswered. Before he was identified, investigators considered that she might have been a teenage runaway or a hitchhiker traveling across multiple states. Indeed, after her identification, it became clear Marcia often hitchhiked and maintained ties to multiple cities like Pittsburgh and Louisville during her travels. Her well-kept appearance, indicated she wasn't living homeless on the street, suggesting she likely had places to stay or people helping her along the way. It has been speculated that she may have been living out of a vehicle, such as a van, when she met her untimely end. Investigators and internet sleuths have speculated that she may have been slain by an as-yet unknown boyfriend or male traveling partner. Others speculate that she may have been involved in a traveling cult, a theory supported by some circumstantial evidence. Given the era and Marcia's red hair, detectives examined possible links to known serial perpetrators. In 1985, her case was briefly considered as possibly related to the so-called redhead slayings, a series of violent acts against red-haired young women across the United States. However, this connection was eventually ruled out, as evidence recovered from those crime scenes and other case specifics simply didn't match. Others wondered if Marcia might have been an early victim of an unidentified serial wrongdoer nicknamed Dr. No, who was known for targeting women along Ohio highways in the 1980s. Despite these theories, no known suspect has ever been arrested or charged in Marcia King's slaying. However, there have been positive movements in the investigation. Since her identification, investigators have pieced together some of her final movements. Marcia was reportedly seen in early April 1981 in Louisville, Kentucky, and possibly was involved with a traveling religious group or cult around the time of her death. At present, authorities still believe that the most likely person responsible for Marcia King's slaying is an as yet unidentified boyfriend. On December 13th, 2020, around 10:55 p.m., Jason Landry left his apartment in San Marcos, Texas, to drive to his parents' home near Houston. By 11:24 p.m., Landry had reached the town of Luling, where his phone data shows he stopped using Waze, turn-by-turn navigation app, and opened Snapchat, a popular multimedia messaging application. Instead of staying on the main highway, he continued straight through town onto a quiet, rural path known as Salt Flat Road. Sometime around midnight, investigators believe Landry's vehicle veered off the gravel road and crashed. In the early morning hours of December 14th, around 12 a.m., a passing volunteer firefighter discovered Landry's Nissan Altima wrecked along Salt Flat Road. The car's headlights were still on and the keys remained in the ignition, but Jason was nowhere to be found. His clothes, backpack, cell phone, and other personal belongings were strewn around the crash site, yet there was no physical sign of him in the immediate area. One theory holds that Jason was injured or disoriented from the impact and wandered off on foot. The night was cold, so if he was in shock or under the influence, he may have become confused and removed his clothing. Paradoxical behavior sometimes observed in severe hypothermia cases. With only a tiny drop of blood found at the scene and no indication of a physical struggle, it appears he survived the wreck with minor injuries and left the vehicle on his own. In this scenario, Landry might have gotten lost in the darkness and ultimately succumbed to the harsh elements. However, some have speculated that he may have been under the influence and actively fleeing from the crash site when he became lost. Another theory suggests that, despite a lack of evidence pointing to major physical injuries, he could have suffered a traumatic brain injury in the accident. This could have caused him to act disoriented, exhibit out-of-character behavior, and wander away from the scene. A third theory suggests third-party involvement in Jason's disappearance. Search dogs tracked Jason's scent from the crash site back toward Luling for about a quarter mile before the trail suddenly vanished. This clue raises the possibility that he got a ride or was picked up by an unknown individual at that spot. However, no direct physical evidence currently supports this scenario. Law enforcement launched an extensive search immediately after Jason's car was found. Caldwell County authorities and volunteer search teams scoured the surrounding terrain with tracking dogs, but found no trace of Landry beyond the belongings left at the crash site and that brief scent track. Investigators also thoroughly analyzed the physical evidence. Examination of the wreck indicated a single car accident with no sign of another vehicle involved. As of February 2025, Jason Landry remains missing, and his case continues to perplex investigators. On February 14, 1975, a couple driving down a rural farm road in Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana, discovered the tragic scene of a young man hanging from a tree. The victim appeared to be a white male teenager, around 16 to 18 years old, with brown hair and eyes. At the base of the tree, investigators found a sealed glass jar containing a lengthy note addressed simply to Mom and Dad. In this letter, the teen expressed deep gratitude to his parents for giving him excellent advantages and privileges. However, he confessed to feeling like a false and empty vessel who never developed into a real person. He described a lifelong, profound depression and a sense of detachment from life. The note even cited sociologist Emile Durkheim's writings on ending oneself, reflecting the boy's intellectual bent. In a poignant postscript, he implored authorities not to investigate his identity, stating that chasing his name would only shatter his parents' peace. To quote the teenager directly, "Do not deprive them of the hope that their missing son will return. Simply cremate me as John Doe." This extremely unusual request set the tone for the mystery to come. No identification was found with the body, only a comb and a laundry marker in his clothing were recovered. Investigators in 1975 made extensive efforts to learn his name. They took the boy's fingerprints and circulated them to police forces nationwide, but no match ever turned up. The case received national media coverage, and over 300 parents of missing sons contacted the Plaquemines Parish Sheriff's Office or came in person to view the body. Yet, after a 4-month campaign failed to identify him, the police ended up closing their file. Tragically, no official case files remain today, and the young man was ultimately interred in an unmarked grave in Gretna, Louisiana. Modern forensic efforts have been severely hampered by the complete lack of dental record or DNA samples. Further, because he was buried in an unmarked grave and the case file was lost, no one is entirely certain where he rests. That said, even if the case file hadn't been lost, it is unlikely that it would have recorded the exact physical location of his burial. The circumstances and the eloquent note have prompted many theories about what led this young person to take such a permanent action. Some have speculated that he might have been consumed by guilt for what he perceived as a serious personal wrongdoing, essentially punishing himself. Others believe he could have been struggling with his identity in an unaccepting era, contributing to his deep despair. Beyond motive, a major question remains: who was this young man? Because no local missing person matched his description, internet sleuths have looked farther afield. One popular theory is that this John Doe might have been Bayard William Cozzens, a 22-year-old from Virginia. Cozzens disappeared in early February 1975. Right after leaving his family, a note telling them not to worry about him. Cozzens was tall and slender, with very dark brown hair and a deep interest in philosophy, details strikingly similar to the Plaquemines victim. However, Cozzens wore glasses, none were found with the John Doe, and he was fairly substantially older than the estimated age of the deceased. The difference between the lowest age estimate for the John Doe and Cozzens' actual age is 6 years. Those years between 16 and 22 are developmentally significant. Further, Cozzens had a very distinctive cross-shaped scar on one of his fingers, which wasn't noted by investigating police. Further yet, because the case file was lost, it may well be that Cozzens was already ruled out by initial investigators. After all, they did interview approximately 300 parents, and given that Bayard went missing contemporaneously with the Doe's discovery, his parents may have been among those 300 interviewed. While news obviously didn't travel with modern speed back then, this story did make national headlines. Parents of missing children at the time were likely glued to news updates as much as possible in 1975. Proponents of this theory suggest Bayard may have traveled over 1,000 miles to Louisiana to end his life anonymously. This aligns with the Doe's expressed wish to spare his parents the pain of discovering his body, keeping the false hope of a positive resolution alive. This idea, while intriguing, remains unconfirmed. Internet sleuths naturally work with even more incomplete data sets than official authorities. It is late at night. A solitary passenger stands alone after a gathering in the city. The air is freezing. Streets are entirely deserted. Getting home as rapidly as possible becomes the only priority. So, the Uber application is opened, a ride is requested. After a brief wait of 1 or 2 minutes, the request is officially accepted. And then, well, a truly unsettling image appears on the screen to reveal the approaching driver. Back in the year 2016, Chinese social media became absolutely inundated with screenshots from users of Uber China. They all reported the exact same bizarre occurrence after requesting a ride. Instead of viewing a standard profile picture of an average driver, passengers found themselves matched with someone resembling a corpse. These profiles featured hollow eyes, a completely vacant expression. Some displayed facial features that were unnaturally stretched out. Others looked like horrors dragged directly from the uncanny valley, or perhaps a catalog of botched plastic surgeries. Images spread across the Weibo platform at an incredible speed. Users naturally wondered if the Uber network had suffered a massive hacking event, or maybe some software glitch caused these grotesque distortions. A faction of the public began to claim these drivers were subjects of a coordinated psychological experiment, one supposedly orchestrated by the government itself. Others genuinely believed they were dealing with paranormal entities that had never actually walked the earth. The media eventually branded these strange accounts as ghost drivers. The actual reality of the situation was decidedly less dramatic, yet it was arguably a lot more fascinating. At that specific time, Uber China enforced a cancellation policy, where passengers terminating a ride after a short grace period were charged a minor fee. This penalty went directly into the driver's pocket. Individually, the cost was merely a few yuan. That is barely enough currency to purchase a standard bottle of water. Drivers operating across the entire country, however, recognized this system as an easy opportunity to essentially print money. All a driver had to do was accept an incoming ride request and somehow persuade the waiting passenger to cancel the trip. What better method to force a cancellation than by introducing oneself as a possessed mannequin? The scammers banked on a very specific reaction. Customers would open the app. They would see a haunted waxwork assigned to collect them. The passenger would then decide they wanted absolutely no involvement with that particular journey and immediately hit cancel. This psychological tactic proved surprisingly effective. It worked particularly well against individuals traveling alone during the late hours of the night. These fraudulent drivers did not need to physically show up at any location. They never had to interact with the passenger. They simply collected the cancellation penalty and patiently waited for the next victim. Over the duration of a single night, those admittedly tiny fees accumulated significantly. But what happened if a passenger was not adequately frightened into canceling the ride? Well, the scammers possessed another clever trick. Following the acceptance of a ride request, multiple victims reported observing the designated vehicle moving on the in-app map. It would appear to steadily approach their exact location. Suddenly, the digital car would drive straight past the passenger without ever slowing down. Mere moments later, the trip would be officially marked as completed. Alternatively, the driver would cancel the trip themselves after submitting a false claim that the customer was absent from the agreed meeting point. Other frustrated users described watching the GPS icon remain completely stationary for extended durations. Then, it would abruptly jump all the way across the city. In certain extreme cases, the driver's geographical location appeared to shoot directly through solid buildings, ultimately ending up floating in the dead center of a lake. A few customers grew legitimately spooked by these impossible movements. Some jumped straight to paranormal conclusions. Actually, this erratic tracking was merely a symptom of location spoofing software being utilized to artificially simulate movement. Once again, providing legitimate transport was never the objective. Triggering the Uber payment system to extract another small fee was the sole goal. A handful of chilling reports even emerged from users who alleged their ghost driver successfully picked them up. The driver then supposedly transported them to a remote, desolate area and forcibly evicted them from the vehicle. This was allegedly exacted as vengeance because the passenger refused to cancel the ride, thereby wasting the scammer's valuable time. Wow! Due to the massive scale of this fraudulent enterprise and the striking similarities found between the fake profiles, widespread suspicion pointed toward a shady, organized syndicate. The consensus leaned heavily away from independent individuals acting alone. Because of the intense online scrutiny surrounding this scam, Uber China was forced to take decisive action. The corporation publicly stated it had adopted a zero-tolerance policy against exploitative behavior. Affected passengers were promised full refunds. The company eventually purged thousands of fraudulent accounts from its system. Furthermore, new facial recognition protocols were implemented to randomly identify active drivers. The timing of this crisis, however, could not have been worse. Just a few short weeks before the ghost driver phenomenon breached the mainstream consciousness, Uber had formally agreed to sell its Chinese operations. The buyer was its most formidable rival, Didi Chuxing. This sale concluded an extraordinarily expensive, protracted battle for dominance over the country's ride-hailing market. Reports of these terrifying ghost drivers merely reinforced lingering public anxieties regarding the platform's overall safety during a highly turbulent corporate transition. Years down the line, this bizarre chapter of internet history would eventually reach Western audiences through viral TikTok videos. The date was March 14, 1998. 39-year-old Lenny Derrickson and his teenage son Jared were quietly beginning what seemed to be a perfectly typical day. They were working together on their family-owned dairy farm located in Strong City, Oklahoma. That specific morning, right around 9 a.m., an unknown stranger slowly drove a white Ford pickup truck straight up to their rural farmhouse. Lenny casually stepped outside to converse with the unidentified man. The ensuing conversation appeared entirely friendly from a distance. According to Jared's later accounts, his father did not seem the least bit alarmed or suspicious. After chatting for several minutes, Lenny briefly returned inside the house. He informed his son that the visitor was highly interested in viewing one of his prize stud horses. Lenny explained he planned to accompany the mysterious man on a trip. They were heading first to Elk City, Oklahoma. Afterward, they planned to cross state lines into Mobeetie, Texas, to inspect more horses. Lenny casually promised he would return to the farm by that same afternoon. He then departed the property, riding as a passenger alongside the stranger. They traveled in the man's white 1994 Ford F-150 pickup truck. This specific vehicle reportedly displayed New Mexico license plates. It also featured a highly distinctive yellow tag mounted on the front bumper. Jared stood and watched his father drive away down the dirt road. The teenager never imagined it would be the absolute last time he would ever see his dad alive. Later that exact same morning, approximately 2 full hours after Lenny had vanished down the driveway, a possible sighting was formally reported. A waitress working a shift at a local diner, situated just a few short miles away from the Derrickson property, contacted authorities. She claimed she observed Lenny sharing a breakfast meal with an unknown male companion. She specifically noted that the unidentified man commanded the vast majority of the conversation. Lenny, meanwhile, simply sat quietly, nursing a cup of black coffee and listening intently. The physical description of this talkative companion perfectly matched the stranger who had previously arrived at the farm. Lenny's immediate family, however, heavily doubted the credibility of this specific diner sighting. They pointed out that he had already consumed a full breakfast at home before the stranger arrived. They rigidly insisted he was not the type of man to eat a second breakfast in a single morning. Logically speaking, however, if a potential business associate requests a quick stop at a diner, accommodating them is simply good manners. Furthermore, according to the waitress's own statement, Lenny was merely drinking coffee. He was not actually consuming a massive second meal. This small detail perfectly aligns with the family's knowledge of his eating habits. Investigating detectives themselves remained deeply unsure if the quiet patron was truly Lenny Derrickson. It could have easily been a simple case of mistaken identity. Aside from this single, unconfirmed report, absolutely no one else could recall seeing Lenny at any point on the day of his sudden disappearance. As soon as the realization hit that Lenny was truly missing, local authorities immediately launched a massive search effort. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation quickly joined the hunt. Detectives thoroughly swept the Derrickson property. They quickly discovered that Lenny had never actually arrived at the specific barn where his stud horses were securely kept. An exhaustive, meticulous investigation spanned the following days and stretched into weeks. The results were incredibly bleak. Police found absolutely no signs of a violent struggle. Zero physical evidence pointing toward foul play was uncovered, and, most distressingly, no body was ever located. Law enforcement possessed incredibly little information to build a cohesive case. They were forced to rely almost entirely upon the initial account provided by young Jared, along with the vague description of the unknown horse buyer. Naturally, this mysterious stranger instantly became the absolute central focus of the entire investigation. He was, after all, the last documented person seen in Lenny's company. A professional composite sketch of the suspect was carefully developed. It relied heavily on visual descriptions provided by both Jared and the local diner waitress. The resulting sketch detailed a white male. He stood approximately 6 feet, 2 inches tall, and weighed roughly 210 pounds. His face featured a full, thick, reddish-brown beard. He was last seen wearing a black baseball cap, prominently displaying a No Fear logo. Despite massive public distribution of this sketch, the man has never been located. He has never been questioned by authorities. He officially remains simply a person of interest rather than a formally charged suspect. 6 long months following Lenny's baffling disappearance, the calendar turned to September 1998. A totally unexpected telephone call suddenly injected a tantalizing, yet ultimately frustrating, lead into the cold case. An anonymous male caller frantically contacted local police from a crowded bar situated in Amarillo, Texas. The man urgently claimed that the missing Lenny Derrickson was currently sitting inside that very establishment. The anonymous tipster provided a highly detailed physical description of the patron he believed was Lenny. Making the situation infinitely stranger, this patron was allegedly loudly boasting to other customers that he personally knew Lenny Derrickson. The frantic caller absolutely refused to provide his own identity to the dispatcher. He did, however, promise he would patiently wait at the bar until uniformed officers arrived on the scene. Police units immediately rushed to the remote Amarillo location, but by the time they finally breached the doors, the trail was entirely cold. Both the anonymous tipster and the man he had confidently identified as Lenny were completely gone. The very next morning, a bartender who had worked the previous shift partially corroborated the bizarre story. The employee distinctly remembered the highly enthusiastic caller loudly proclaiming that Lenny was sitting in the bar. Investigating detectives found absolutely no logical reason to disbelieve the caller's incredible account. The bartender's supporting narrative added significant weight to the claim. Despite being an incredibly encouraging lead, it rapidly slammed into a total dead end. Neither Lenny nor the elusive anonymous caller could ever be tracked down for official verification. Law enforcement agencies doggedly continued to chase down various other scattered leads and anonymous tips over the ensuing years. Tragically, every single one ultimately fizzled out into nothingness. Over the intervening decades, several distinct theories have naturally emerged in an attempt to logically explain what exactly happened to Lenny Derrickson. One prominent theory suggests Lenny voluntarily abandoned his old world to secretly start a brand new life. Police investigators carefully noted that Lenny had recently suffered through a deeply painful divorce. Furthermore, he was actively struggling with severe financial distress regarding his dairy farm. Global milk prices were experiencing a massive, sustained decline. Crushed under the immense weight of mounting personal and financial disasters, some speculate he might have viewed the stranger's arrival as a perfect opportunity to permanently escape. In fact, a few seasoned law enforcement officials seriously considered the genuine possibility that Lenny left entirely of his own free will. He might have quietly found anonymous work as a ranch hand somewhere hundreds of miles from his previous home. A massive counterpoint to this theory exists, however. He was profoundly devoted to his 16-year-old son, Jared. The boy has repeatedly expressed massive doubt that his father would have ever willingly abandoned him. The deep personal bond shared with his teenage son casts incredibly significant doubt on any voluntary disappearance theory. A vastly more ominous, unsettling theory proposes that Lenny was the tragic victim of foul play. This violence was presumably orchestrated by the unidentified man in the white truck, or perhaps unknown associates connected to him. This specific hypothesis suggests the stranger deliberately lured Lenny away from the safety of his farm using a carefully fabricated lie. The story about wanting to purchase a stud horse was merely a trap to isolate him. Several disturbing details strongly support these deep suspicions of foul play. For one crucial thing, Lenny had never publicly advertised any horse for sale. The stranger's sudden inquiry regarding livestock was entirely unexpected. Seasoned investigators also found it incredibly troubling that the unknown visitor even knew how to locate the isolated Derrickson farm. The property was situated in a highly remote rural area. It was not a place someone could easily stumble upon without explicit prior directions. This disturbing fact strongly suggests Lenny's selection as a target might not have been a random event. The bearded man could have personally known Lenny, or perhaps learned specific details about his remote farm through a third party. If the sighting at the diner was indeed accurate, that casual, public meeting might indicate the stranger was actively attempting to gain Lenny's total trust before eventually leading him to a far more isolated, dangerous location. Ultimately, there is absolutely zero concrete evidence, at least nothing that is currently accessible to the general public, proving Lenny Derrickson ever met with any sort of violent foul play. The term publicly accessible is deliberately utilized here. Deep within the recesses of online true crime forums, rampant speculation exists. Some users claim the police formally requested to search the private property of a specific, unnamed suspect. This suspect allegedly invoked their rights and adamantly refused to permit law enforcement access to the land. These claims, however, are strictly relegated to anonymous online comments. They cannot be officially substantiated through police records. They may very well amount to nothing more than toxic, baseless rumor mill gossip. One slightly less prominent yet medically plausible theory involves the concept of a dissociative fugue state. This is especially relevant when taking the bizarre Amarillo bar incident into careful consideration. Lenny had recently endured a highly difficult divorce. He was actively facing crippling financial ruin. The immense psychological stress could have potentially triggered a severe mental break, causing him to wander away and subconsciously adopt an entirely new identity. Medical literature suggests, however, that these specific mental states typically resolve themselves within a matter of weeks or perhaps months. Once again, Lenny possessed a son he deeply loved. It remains incredibly difficult to imagine him never making any attempt to contact Jared if his memory had eventually returned. The final prominent theory suggests a tragic vehicular accident. Under this scenario, Lenny and the unknown man were traveling along an unforgiving rural dirt road. The truck subsequently lost control and violently crashed into a deep body of water. Neither the vehicle nor the occupants have ever been recovered. There is significant historical precedent supporting this grim idea. Throughout the annals of missing persons cases, there are numerous documented instances where a missing vehicle was finally discovered decades later. They are often found completely submerged, rotting away at the muddy bottom of a local lake or a dangerously deep river. Kurt McFall entered the world on December 9, 1966. His birthplace was San Diego, California. Raised primarily within a quiet suburban environment, Kurt gained a reputation as a highly intelligent student at Clayton Valley High School. He was well liked by his peers. Acquaintances frequently described his personality as remarkably confident and, deeply caring. He eagerly participated in various extracurricular pursuits, dedicating his time to both the school newspaper and the official yearbook club. Academic subjects like advanced mathematics and complex sciences heavily occupied his interests. Beyond the traditional classroom setting, Kurt possessed a profound love for the great outdoors. He enthusiastically engaged in intense recreational activities. Swimming and scaling steep cliffs were among his favorite pastimes. A budding early fascination with the tabletop game Dungeons & Dragons eventually steered him toward joining the Society for Creative Anachronism. This specific organization was completely dedicated to the meticulous revival of medieval European customs. On Saturday, September 8, 1984, Kurt departed his family residence located in Concord, California. He steered his vehicle across the expanse of the Bay Bridge, heading directly into San Francisco. His stated itinerary involved spending the evening with a close acquaintance. He intended to drive back home by Sunday evening. The exact sequence of events that unfolded that dark night, however, remained shrouded in absolute uncertainty. Accounts provided by individuals intimately close to the teenager suggested Kurt had become increasingly entangled in a subculture drastically removed from his conventional suburban upbringing. In addition to his active participation in the SCA, a strong interest in the occult had seemingly taken root. He allegedly joined a secluded group fundamentally focused on pagan religious practices. Long after the tragedy, a former high school companion disclosed a disturbing conversation. Kurt had reportedly spoken about his direct involvement with a satanic cult that actively experimented with dark magic. This confidant explained how Kurt felt hopelessly trapped by the organization's grip. He supposedly feared for his own physical safety if he ever attempted to permanently sever ties. Exactly 2 days following his unexplained disappearance, the calendar read Monday, September 10th, 1984. Two amateur bird watchers were quietly exploring the rugged, treacherous cliffs situated at Land's End in San Francisco Bay. They stumbled upon a truly grim discovery. Lying on a remote, rocky beach far below the towering cliffs rested the bruised, half-naked remains of Kurt McFall. Essential articles of clothing were mysteriously absent from the body. He lacked a shirt. No shoes were found. His socks were entirely missing. The physical remains displayed multiple traumatic injuries, coupled with evidence of massive blood loss. The specific condition of the teenager's body deeply puzzled medical examiners. Despite the severe trauma clearly present, only minor surface abrasions were documented on various parts of his skin. Toxicology reports confirmed there was absolutely zero sign of illicit substances or alcohol in his biological system. Scattered around Kurt's abandoned vehicle were numerous empty beer bottles. This car was located parked on a nearby golf course that provided a sweeping overlook of the Pacific Ocean. Investigating officers systematically noted several other highly unusual details present at the scene. Kurt's official driver's license was discovered resting on the floorboard. The keys to the vehicle had been casually discarded directly on the driver's seat. Perhaps most remarkably, an expensive, prized suit of armor piece he had specifically purchased for his medieval reenactment activities was missing from the car's trunk. The presiding San Francisco coroner officially determined that the cause of death stemmed from multiple traumatic injuries and severe blood loss. The formal autopsy report did suggest the sustained injuries were largely consistent with a catastrophic fall from a great height. It carefully noted, however, that the precise mechanism causing those injuries could never be conclusively proven. Initial theories proposed by law enforcement suggested the fatality was simply a probable accident resulting from a late-night cliff-climbing excursion. Later on, the coroner himself went on record to remark that an intentional malicious act remained a highly plausible cause. Despite this professional opinion, insufficient physical evidence existed to pursue any formal criminal charges. Consequently, the official manner of death was classified as strictly unknown. The case was left entirely unresolved. One of the most intensely debated aspects surrounding this entire mystery involves a man named Gabriel Carrillo. This individual utilized the Welsh moniker Caradoc while serving in his capacity as a respected leader within a local neo-pagan group. Carrillo openly acknowledged befriending young Kurt. He permitted the teenager to spend nights resting at his private apartment. Regarding the specific night the death occurred, Carrillo recounted that Kurt had previously gone swimming in the frigid waters of Ocean Beach. Later on, at approximately 3 a.m., Kurt allegedly knocked on Carrillo's door. The teenager supposedly announced his immediate intention to return to the dark beach. Carrillo publicly theorized that Kurt might have simply taken far too many foolish risks during that turbulent night. Perhaps he slipped on the damp rocks, or maybe a powerful undertow dragged him out to sea. Carrillo rigidly maintained that the tragedy was nothing more than a horrible accident. Kurt's grieving father, along with several close companions, remained deeply suspicious of this specific narrative. As the decades have slowly passed, various distinct theories have been actively circulated to rationalize the mysterious demise of Kurt McFall. The primary theory remains the most straightforward. He suffered fatal injuries strictly due to an accidental plunge. The cliffs at Land's End are notoriously treacherous. It remains entirely within the realm of logic that Kurt lost his footing while navigating the rocky terrain or attempting to enter the crashing surf. Proponents of this accidental theory heavily emphasize the complete lack of defensive wounds or trauma indicative of a physical altercation. An alternative, darker theory insists Kurt was deliberately pushed over the precipice. This implies direct foul play. This specific viewpoint has been heavily championed by the victim's father, Tom McFall. Tom held a steadfast belief that his son did not simply perish by sheer accident. He frequently argued that Kurt was an experienced climber, vastly more adept at safely traversing dangerous cliff environments. A crucial element to consider regarding this perspective is the sheer danger of the environment. Scaling jagged cliffs in the pitch black of night is extremely hazardous. Doing so during dark, stormy weather conditions exponentially increases the risk of a fatal error. Tom McFall also pointed toward the peculiar staging discovered near the abandoned vehicle. The sudden appearance of beer bottles and the baffling theft of the heavy armor suit indicated to him a deliberate tampering of the scene. An essential fact often overlooked in the case files regarding those empty beer bottles must be addressed. Family members and close acquaintances unanimously confirmed that Kurt absolutely did not consume alcohol. While a grieving parent's defense of a child's habits might sometimes be viewed with mild skepticism, the fact that his entire peer group completely corroborated this detail is undeniably significant. A third distinct explanation proposes the crime scene was systematically altered long after Kurt was already deceased. According to widespread discussions hosted on various true crime forums, some individuals theorized that local vagrants wandered by the area, or perhaps opportunistic scavengers stumbled upon the unlocked, abandoned vehicle. These unknown parties might have unknowingly tampered with the surrounding scene. Proponents of this theory suggest the empty beer bottles, along with other discarded items, were simply left behind by these random passersby. They were not basic components of a sprawling occult conspiracy. This specific hypothesis attempts to bridge the gap between the accidental fall scenario and the bizarre clues found near the golf course. It argues the environment was unintentionally contaminated by completely unrelated individuals. Kurt's tragic case originally captured massive public attention primarily because it unfolded during the absolute peak of the 1980s Satanic Panic. Media outlets frequently presented the mystery in a wildly sensationalist manner. They constantly attempted to forcibly tie his unfortunate death into the broader hysterical narratives dominating the evening news broadcasts at that time. The most plausible explanation, according to an objective review of the available evidence, points toward a tragic accident. The official autopsy revealed absolutely no signs of intoxicating substances. A horrific fall from the precarious, crumbling cliffs of Land's End seems to be a case of terrible misfortune, rather than a calculated, deliberate homicide. Occult theories certainly offer a tempting, cinematic narrative. The simplest explanation, however, frequently proves to be the most accurate. In this specific instance, an accidental plunge appears to be the most logical, reality-based scenario. Gabriel Carrillo was aggressively portrayed as a malicious Satanist by the press during that era. Deeper historical research, however, reveals he was actually a practicing Wiccan. His primary focus centered heavily on ancient Celtic traditions. Numerous historical accounts from individuals who personally knew him as Caradoc describe a different man entirely. These sources consistently report he was deeply invested in practicing white magic. He focused on manifesting positive, benevolent energy within the world. When examined through this grounded lens, his activities sound significantly less sinister. Media sensationalism, thoroughly intertwined with the overbearing overlay of the Satanic Panic, undoubtedly manipulated public perception of this enduring mystery. Okay, so, on December 8th, 2010, a local hunter stumbled across something horrible in the woods near Nashville, Tennessee. He found a human skull sitting roughly 30 yards off Pecan Valley Road. Police searched the area, couldn't find any other bones. The medical examiner couldn't determine a cause of death just from the skull. Since they didn't know who the man was, police called him the Pecan Valley John Doe. Traditional forensic methods hit a dead end. The police kept the details quiet. But in 2023, Nashville police teamed up with Othram, a specialized DNA lab, to use genetic genealogy on the case. Scientists pulled a DNA profile from the degraded bone and used public genealogy databases to find living relatives. 14 years after the hunter found the skull, police announced it belonged to Marcus Rutledge. Marcus Rutledge was a student at Tennessee State University who vanished in the summer of 1998. He last spoke to his girlfriend on the phone around 1:30 p.m. on June 8th. She tried calling him later that night, and when he never showed up for their plans, she reported him missing. When family and friends checked his apartment, they found his dog locked inside the bathroom. It looked like Marcus had left right in the middle of his day. His 1995 Plymouth Neon was gone too. 3 weeks later, police found the car parked at an apartment complex in West Nashville. The car didn't give them much to work with. There was no blood and no sign of a struggle, but investigators did find a gun hidden inside. Marcus's family had no idea he owned a weapon and said it didn't fit his calm personality. People hide things though. His ex-girlfriend told police she wasn't surprised about the gun, mentioning that Marcus had gotten into several altercations in the months before he vanished. Police searched the area and got the story on the local news, but the case went cold. Metro Nashville police always assumed he was murdered. Finding his skull out in the woods pretty much confirmed it. In 2020, a cold case detective took another look at the file. He found out Marcus was hiding a lot from his family. For when he had dropped out of college, he also started selling street cabbage and other illicit drugs to pay the bills. It's wild that the original detectives missed the fact that he wasn't even enrolled in school. The cold case detective learned Marcus had gotten into several physical fights right before he went missing. Police now think his dangerous side business got him killed. 8 months after Marcus vanished, his best friend and former roommate, Ethan Gibbs, was executed in his home by an unknown shooter. The two men supposedly sold drugs together, making detectives wonder if the murders were connected. But when they compared the files, they couldn't find any physical evidence linking the two crimes. Police eventually arrested someone for Gibbs' murder, but the state dropped the charges, leaving that case unsolved too. Science gave Marcus Rutledge his name back, but the big questions remain. The police are treating it as an active homicide investigation. Since they only found a skull, they don't know how or exactly when he died. The family finally got a little bit of closure, but now the police have to figure out who killed Marcus and why. Look closely at room 2805 at the Oslo Plaza, one of Norway's fanciest hotels and the second tallest building in the country, and you'll find a really disturbing scene. Taken from the hallway, the photos show what looks like a standard hotel room after checkout. There is some trash on the table by the window, a bedspread is rolled up on a chair, the TV is running in the corner, the bed sheets are pulled back. But something feels wrong, and when you look closer it becomes clear the guest never actually checked out. The woman staying in room 2805 registered as Jennifer Fairgate. Staff remembered her dressing well during her stay. She originally checked in on the evening of May 31st, 1995. One receptionist working that night remembers her checking in alone. Another staff member insists she was with a dark-haired man. Either way, she listed a second guest on her booking form, Louis Fairgate, so the front desk gave her 2 electronic keycards. According to the digital door locks, Jennifer used her key only 5 times over the next 3 days. She used it at 10:44 p.m. on May 31st, right after checking in, then again at midnight, next at 8 a.m. on June 1st, then at 8 a.m. on June 2nd, and finally at 11 a.m. on June 2nd. That data log creates a strange gap. Hotel housekeeping went into her room at 12:44 p.m. on June 1st and noted she wasn't there. Because the system only tracked when guests opened the door, it means she left her room sometime between 8 a.m. and 12:44 p.m. that day, and she didn't come back until 8 a.m. the following morning. Where she went for those 20 to 24 hours is a total mystery. Later in her stay, the reception desk sent a message to her TV screen asking her to come down and pay her movie bill. Someone pressed OK on the remote to acknowledge it. That same evening, the landline phone in her room dialed 2 fake phone numbers. By June 3rd, Jennifer still hadn't come down to the lobby. The data log showed her keycard hadn't been used for almost 33 hours. Unless someone else was already inside the room to let her in, she hadn't left her room during all that time. A hotel security guard went upstairs to check on her around 7:50 p.m. He ordered a do not disturb sign on the handle. He ignored it and knocked. Right after he hit the door, he heard a loud gunshot from inside the room. The guard backed down the hallway to get help, leaving the scene unattended. When he and other staff members came back about 15 minutes later, the heavy door was locked from the inside. They forced the door open and found Jennifer lying on the bed. Her legs dangled over the edge, feet touching the floor. She had been shot in the center of the forehead while lying flat on her back. A 9mm Browning pistol rested in her right hand, positioned gently across her chest. Her finger was still on the trigger. 7 live rounds were left in the magazine. She held the gun in a strange reverse grip, fingers wrapped around the back, using her thumb to press the trigger. Under her head, investigators found a pillow with a second bullet hole fired clean through it. When police tried to identify the body, they hit a wall. Jennifer Fairgate didn't exist. It was an alias. She spelled it 2 different ways on the hotel forms. The Belgian home address she gave was fake. The company she supposedly worked for wasn't in any business registry. Every attempt to trace her real identity led nowhere. Detectives pivoted to her registered guest, Louis Fairgate, but they couldn't find a trace of him either. Nobody even knows if he was a real person who actually showed up at the hotel. As investigators dug into the room, the details got weirder. There was no handbag, no driver's license, no passport, no house keys, no money. There was zero ID to tell them who this woman was. She looked put together and had fresh makeup on, but there were no cosmetics or toiletries in the bathroom. The only grooming item they found was a single bottle of men's aftershave. She brought very little luggage for a multi-day stay at a luxury hotel. Her clothes were another puzzle. The garments were expensive and well made, but almost every brand label had been removed. They weren't just torn off, they were cut out stitch by stitch, like someone wanted to make sure the clothes could never be traced back to a store. The only tag left was on her blazer, which read René Lazard, a German fashion brand. Strangely, police found no clothing for her lower half in the room, besides what she was wearing when she died. No extra skirts, pants, or even spare underwear. A pair of colourful shoes that a maid specifically noticed while cleaning the room on June 1st were missing entirely. The gun was just as problematic. Someone used harsh acid to eat away the serial number, making it impossible to trace the buyer. Near the bed, police found a small briefcase holding 25 extra rounds of ammunition and nothing else. But the most unsettling clue was a plastic bag holding a copy of USA Today. The bag was marked in ink with the room number 2816. Police cleared all the other guests on Jennifer's floor, except one, the person staying in room 2816. Their true identity remains a mystery. We do know the room was occupied. The guest in the adjacent suite reported hearing heavy thudding noises coming through the wall from 2816 early on June 3rd. Forensics pulled a partial fingerprint from that plastic bag. It didn't belong to Jennifer, and it didn't match anyone in the international criminal databases. These weird circumstances have kept investigators and internet sleuths guessing for decades. One theory is that Jennifer was a private person who went to extreme lengths to end her own life on her own terms. The fact that her door was double locked from the inside supports this. The hole in the pillow suggests she fired a preliminary test shot. But forensic experts found it strange that despite the blood spatter on the walls, ceiling, and the gun itself, there wasn't a single drop of blood on Jennifer's hands. There was also no gunshot residue on her skin. People wonder if someone else killed her, then fired a second shot into the pillow to stage the scene, wrapping her hand around the weapon so her thumb gripped the trigger. The fake names, the missing clothing tags, and the lack of ID make people think Jennifer was a spy. Other hotel guests noted she spoke flawless English and French without an accent, which fits with intelligence work. She also wore a Citizen Aqualand, bulky tactical dive watch often used by military operators. Could this have been a covert job that went wrong? Was she working with whoever was staying in room 2816? Did she spend her missing 24 hours in that exact room down the hall? Some people think her fake alias, nice clothes, and strange overnight absence mean she was a high-end escort. If so, a violent client or a handler might be responsible for what happened in that room. Escorts are often estranged from their families, which would explain why nobody filed a missing persons report after 1995. In 2016, authorities exhumed Jennifer's body for DNA testing. The results showed she was likely from East Germany and was about 24 years old when she died. But even with that data, no missing persons reports matched her profile. No family members came forward. 31 years later, room 2805 and the strange things left inside it are still the only clues we have. Jerry and Rita Alter looked like a totally average American couple, but they might have been running a very strange, wildly profitable side business. Jerry was a retired public school music teacher. Rita worked as a speech pathologist. They had 2 grown children. From the outside, they were a normal middle-class family living a quiet life. In 1977, they traded New York for Cliff, New Mexico. They built a modest ranch house on 20 acres. Rita got a job as a speech therapist in the local schools, and Jerry settled into early retirement. Neighbors thought of them as polite, educated people. Friends even described them as not exactly thrill seekers. Despite living on what looked like a fixed income, the Alters traveled the world. They vacationed during school breaks and visited more than 140 countries. They took lots of photos and even published a book about their travels. By the time they died, Jerry in 2012 and Rita in 2017, couple had over $1 million in the bank. Their actual net worth was probably much higher. Nothing in their background suggested they were criminals, yet this quiet pair ended up at the center of one of the art world's strangest unsolved mysteries. On the morning of November 29th, 1985, the day after Thanksgiving, someone robbed the University of Arizona Museum of Art in Tucson. A man and a woman walked into the building right after it opened around 9 a.m. The woman struck up a conversation with the security guard on the ground floor. The man slipped upstairs to the main gallery. He took a blade and sliced a valuable painting right out of its frame. He rolled it up, hid it under his coat and walked away. 15 minutes after arriving, the pair walked out the front doors with their prize. They took Willem de Kooning's Woman Ochre, an abstract expressionist painting worth an absolute fortune. A witness later recalled seeing the thieves speed away in a red car. The detectives found very few other leads. There were no usable fingerprints. The museum didn't even have security cameras. The administration ended up using their insurance payout to finally buy some. Police distributed composite sketches based on eyewitness descriptions. They showed a middle-aged man with curly hair, heavy glasses, and a thick mustache, along with a woman wearing a scarf and large wire-rimmed glasses. The case went cold anyway. The FBI added Woman Ochre to its art crime list, and years went by without a single break. This wasn't just a random painting. The stolen piece is estimated to be worth up to $150 million today. For over 3 decades, the artwork and the thieves simply vanished. The case took a wild turn in August 2017. After Rita Alter died that summer, the couple's two sons liquidated the estate. David Van Orker, an antique dealer in Silver City, New Mexico, bought the entire contents of the house for roughly $2,000. While clearing out the remote property in Cliff, Van Orker noticed a large framed painting hanging behind the master bedroom door. The artwork was positioned so you couldn't see it when the door was open. Someone even installed a homemade wooden doorstop to keep the door from swinging back and hitting the canvas. The painting was dirty, cracked, and covered in thick cobwebs. It looked like it had been hanging in that hidden spot for years. Van Orker brought it back to his shop. Visiting artists and customers immediately noticed it looked exactly like a real de Kooning. Suspecting he might have the long-lost woman ochre, Van Orker called the museum in Arizona. Art experts confirmed it. The canvas was the original woman ochre stolen back in 1985. The masterpiece was turned over to authorities, restored, and put back on public display. With the painting found in Jerry and Rita Alter's house, investigators had to figure out if this quiet couple actually pulled off the heist. They unearthed some interesting clues. A primary piece of circumstantial evidence was a family Thanksgiving photo taken in Tucson. The date on the photo was November 28, 1985, the day before the robbery. In the picture, Jerry and Rita are smiling at a dinner table with relatives, placing them in the same city of the museum just hours before the crime. When people look back at the original police sketches, the resemblance was hard to ignore. The sketch of the woman matches Rita Alter's appearance back then. The sketch of the man doesn't look exactly like Jerry's everyday face, but investigators think he might have worn a fake moustache and a wig. The man in the sketch also had a dark tan. The family picture from the day prior shows Jerry without one, which makes a perfect match less likely, though makeup could explain it. Other coincidences piled up. According to their nephew Ron Rosenman, the Alters almost exclusively bought red cars. That detail lined up perfectly with the red getaway vehicle. The bizarre way woman ochre was hidden inside their home also suggested they were trying to keep a secret. Van Orker noted that when he removed the painting, its outline was burned into the wall behind it. It had been hanging there for a very long time. The couple never showed the painting to any house guests. One of the strangest clues actually came from Jerry Alter himself. In 2011, he self-published a book of short stories called The Cup and the Lip, Exotic Tales. One story, Eye of the Jaguar, is about a grandmother and granddaughter who team up to rob a local museum. They distract a security guard and steal a massive 120-carat emerald. Instead of selling it, they hide it behind a secret wall panel and promise that only their eyes will ever see it. The fictional thieves leave zero evidence behind. The parallels to the woman ochre heist are obvious. The Lone Guard distraction, the prized object taken without a trace, the secret hiding spot. It looks a lot like Jerry wrote a story about the exact crime he and his wife committed. Despite these clues, there is no direct physical proof tying the Alters to the theft. No fingerprints, no positive ID. Jerry and Rita were both dead by the time the painting was recovered. They were never questioned or charged. Their two adult children maintain they didn't even know the painting was behind the door until 2017. Officially, the criminal case remains unsolved, but the circumstantial evidence points straight to Jerry and Rita Alter. The big question is why they did it. Friends and family want to believe the Alters bought the painting on the black market or unknowingly bought it from the real thieves. Ron Rosenman wondered if someone approached them at a local art show offering the painting for cheap. That sounds like a relative trying to rationalize how their aunt and uncle got mixed up in a massive felony. The couple never tried to sell the painting. That fact makes behavioral experts think Jerry and Rita stole it for the adrenaline thrill or just because they loved art rather than for the money. Adding to the story, federal investigators started looking into whether the Alters were involved in other art thefts in 2023 and 2024. During the same year woman ochre was stolen, two other valuable paintings went missing from the Harwood Museum of Art in Tartal, New Mexico. The FBI joined the investigation into those 1985 burglaries, suspecting Jerry and Rita might have been responsible. If true, it means the quiet couple pulled off multiple successful art heists that year using calculated distraction and stealth. But so far, no other stolen artworks have been linked to their estate. She was a 26-year-old Belgian mother from Mechelen, an old city near Antwerp. She vanished in 2010, but what makes this case so crazy is that nobody bothered to tell the police she was missing for 14 years. She had a tough early life, spending time in institutional care. At 18, Heidi cut off contact with her biological family. She moved in with her older boyfriend in a town called Balen. The backstory of that relationship is messed up, and it matters a lot to the investigation. By 2008, the couple lived together in Balen with their 3 young kids, who were 2, 3, and 7 at the time. Neighbors said they kept to themselves and rarely talked to anyone. In mid-2010, Heidi de Schepper disappeared without a trace. An acquaintance said she was just gone one day, taking her belongings with her. Her live-in boyfriend, who was the father of her kids and also used to be her foster parent, told authorities years later that she went missing in 2010, but nobody filed a missing persons report when it actually happened. Not her family, not her friends, not her partner. Her ex-boyfriend did tell a social services office that she had moved away, claiming he did it so he wouldn't illegally collect government benefit checks in her name. But that was it. Because no one spoke the government didn't know she was missing. Official records basically showed she just moved away. The last paper trail of her life was a provisional driver's license collected on May 6, 2010. We don't even know if Heidi picked it up herself. That license never became permanent, and her national ID card expired in 2011. By November 2010, someone told the local government Heidi didn't live at her address anymore. After a routine check, officials removed her name from the population register. In Belgium, that meant her absence didn't set off any legal alarms. On paper, she just ceased to exist. It was pure luck that the truth came out 14 years later. In late 2023, a school report for one of her kids flagged a weird anomaly. The mother had been absent from all records for over a decade. That finally triggered a missing person investigation. In January 2025, the Belgian Federal Police issued a public appeal for information. The case grabbed the whole country's attention. Headlines asked how a mother of 3 could vanish for 14 years without anyone caring enough to call the cops. Police admitted they had spent a year looking and found zero trace of Heidi anywhere in Europe. About 20 tips trickled in from people who used to know her, but nothing broke the case open. Public suspicion fell hard on Heidi's boyfriend. He was the last person to see her alive, and their relationship history was deeply disturbing. This older man actually served as Heidi's foster parent before they started dating. After he divorced his wife, woman who acted as a mother figure to Heidi, he got together with Heidi. As one investigator put it, Heidi was once my foster daughter. After I divorced my wife, I started a relationship with Heidi. Heidi was already pregnant with our first child at the age of 19. That guardian-turned-boyfriend dynamic shocked the local community. People find it hard to give the ex-boyfriend the benefit of the doubt given that history. The boyfriend denies having anything to do with her disappearance. He insists Heidi left on her own. He claims their relationship fell apart by 2010 because Heidi got addicted to meth. Keep in mind, this is just his version of events. There are zero medical or arrest record proving she had a drug problem. He says he gave her an ultimatum: choose the drugs or the kids. He claims things blew up in June 2010. According to him, Heidi picked up the kids from school, dropped them at his parents' house, said I'm gone, grabbed some clothes and cash, and vanished. He says he never saw or spoke to her again. Given the 14-year head start, police are keeping all the options open. One theory is that Heidi ran away to escape her life. People point to the missing clothes and cash as proof she planned to leave. Maybe she felt trapped by her living situation and just walked away to start over. Her former boyfriend pushes this idea hard. He's even suggested she might be living quietly in Spain, but it's hard to believe she pulled off a fresh start alone. She had no income. Most importantly, she never tried to contact her 3 kids. Friends say Heidi was a devoted mom who would never walk away from her children. Then again, police reports suggest these friends were more like casual acquaintances who might not have known what was really going on in her head. Another possibility is that Heidi died by accident or suicide. If she was overwhelmed by domestic issues and died somewhere far from home, she might have been buried as a Jane Doe. The most popular theory is foul play. Given the history, a lot of people are looking at the ex-boyfriend. He was in a position of authority as her foster father before he started sleeping with her. The fact that he didn't report her missing and the convenient way she was wiped off the government registers looks bad. Legal experts point out he had 14 years to clean up any evidence. When victims try to leave abusive relationships, that's usually when they are in the most danger. The ex-boyfriend might have made up the whole drug ultimatum story to explain why she left. Authorities actually detained and interrogated him in January 2025, but they haven't charged him. Any of these theories could be true. It's easy to see why Heidi would want to escape that house. But because she wanted to escape, and because breakups are dangerous, it's also easy to see why police suspect a crime. The public is still waiting to see what the police can prove. The internet has a funny way of breathing new life into forgotten mysteries. That happens a lot when the story revolves around a genuinely disturbing piece of media. Somebody digs up an eerie or horrific recording from decades ago. Then that footage gets copied, mirrored, uploaded dozens of times across every platform imaginable. Amateur detectives start picking apart every single frame, hunting for hidden details. But even with millions of people analyzing the video until their eyes bleed, nobody ever figures out the actual truth of what happened. One of the most unsettling examples of this is a grainy VHS tape. It dates back to the mid-1980s and centers on a martial arts instructor named Bobby Joe Blythe. Blythe was a former Marine known around town for a nasty confrontational personality. He bragged openly about enjoying killing people during his military service. He also constantly reminded people that many of his students were bodyguards and local police officers, basically implying he was untouchable. Rumors circulated that he would deliberately lure transients into his training center just so his advanced black belts could use them for target practice. Aside from martial arts, Blythe taught firearms classes. He actually drew a massive wave of public backlash after staging a fatal shooting scenario in front of a group of children. He loudly challenged the kids with the phrase, "If you're so good at karate, so good, you stop this!" But as bizarre as that event was, it was overshadowed by the tape in question. The recording surfaced online in 2009, bearing the title, "Jesus Taught Me."
This guy, like I say, he's a priest. He's a 10th degree red belt. And who'd you say promoted you to 10th degree red belt? Jesus did. Okay. And I know every one of us would like to be taught by someone that has been taught by Jesus. Correct, John? Yes, sir. Absolutely. Because I guarantee you, that's got to be some movements to behold, right?
The video starts off looking like a joke. A homeless gentleman wanders into Blythe Street Mall Dojo in Dumfries, Virginia, claiming the Lord had personally taught him martial arts. Because nobody ever figured out his true identity, online communities just call him KFG or Kung Fu Guy. Bobby Joe Blythe sarcastically introduces the supposed master. He then pushes the man to showcase his skills on one of his students, a black belt named Willie J. Dennis. Anyone watching can see KFG does not want to physically spar with Dennis. He states clearly that he only wants to demonstrate his moves around the student, not actually fight him. At one point he says, "I just wish to teach you, I don't wish to hurt."
I just wish to teach you, I don't wish to hurt you. Teach me.
"Teach me," Dennis suddenly yells and strikes out at the man. KFG counters the aggression with some energetic kicks and punches of his own.
"Don't do that anymore."
But Dennis keeps coming. Again, KFG exclaims, "No, just don't do that."
"No, just don't do that. Good. I'm not a fighter."
As the sparring continues, Dennis slips on the mat and misses a sweeping kick. And even though his opponent's movements are theatrical, to an untrained eye, KFG actually looks like the better fighter. Maybe Dennis felt embarrassed in front of his peers and his instructor. He drops the formal technique entirely and turns the demonstration into a street brawl. He grabs KFG, punches him square in the face, and tosses him to the ground while shouting an expletive. Dennis just keeps hitting him. The older man manages to get back on his feet, repeating that he does not want to fight anymore. What happens next is incredibly difficult to watch. Dennis ignores him and lands a massive hit that drops KFG to the mat. Unable to control his temper, Dennis then knees KFG in the head. The blow knocks the man into a solid metal pole, knocking him out instantly. Dennis then proceeds to stomp on the unconscious man's head repeatedly. When the brutal beating finally stops, KFG can be heard drawing laboured, guttural breaths. It sounds exactly like a person struggling with an obstructed airway. Medical professionals who analysed the audio later noted that this specific breathing pattern points directly to a severe traumatic brain injury. Through all of this chaos, Bobby Joe Bly doesn't lift a finger to stop it. He just orders his students to drag KFG out the back door. The camera lens lingers on a thick trail of blood leading out of the building. Blythe provides a chilling voiceover.
What we have here is the trail of the Kung Fu master as he is departing my dojo. Just taken on 13 December 1984, about 7 p.m.
The video ends, not with an explanation of what happened to the victim, but on a worryingly large red smear left on the rear exit door. For 25 years, that tape gathered dust in Bobby Joe Blythe's private collection. It only came to light in 2009 because Blythe decided to digitize the recording and upload it to his personal YouTube channel under the handle Bobby Joe Blythe 007. In the comments, viewers tore into the black belt Dennis. Blythe replied to the backlash without an ounce of remorse. He wrote, "If it would have took longer, I would have dropped them both. I was very disappointed with my guy and he paid for a week after that." But most viewers were much more worried about KFG. His injuries looked and sounded catastrophic. People naturally assumed the worst. As the backlash grew, Blythe updated the video's description. He claimed the injured man was a local nuisance who frequently stole pizza. He wrote that the man had the beating coming, adding that he just left him in a commercial dumpster for the local police to pick at. Because nobody knew whether KFG lived or died, the viral video was forwarded to law enforcement. Investigators started looking into whether the tape depicted an unreported homicide. Hampton Police Chief Carlos Smithers was one of many professionals who thought it did. Having seen him get stomped, his head stomped as many times as he did.
Having seen him get stomped, his head stomped as many times as he did, I would be surprised that he survived it or did not at least have major brain damage.
YouTube eventually pulled the original video for graphic content, but the internet didn't let it go. Sleuths obsessively tried to identify the homeless man. Entire web pages popped up to crowdsource the mystery. The largest group, known as Justice for Kung Fu Guy, produced enhanced screenshots of the victim's face. After digging through historical missing persons reports, they found a man named Richard Ricardo Dyer. He did look a bit like KFG. The problem with that theory is Dyer didn't officially disappear until January 1987. That is about 2 years after the dojo incident supposedly happened, assuming Blythe narrated the correct date on the tape. Ultimately, it seems unlikely that Richard Dyer was the Kung Fu Guy. The only piece of evidence hinting at KFG's fate comes from a retired Prince William County detective named Chuck Feldbush. He claimed he knew both Bobby Joe Blythe and the victim. According to his memory, the homeless man was a local vagrant who lived in the woods near the martial arts studio. He was occasionally arrested for minor nuisance offences, like stealing pizza from local restaurants. The detective stated he ran into the man several days after the filmed assault. He noted the man was limping badly but was still alive. Feldbush also claimed the injured man refused to press charges. No police record have ever surfaced to back up the officer's account. To this day, KFG's true identity and final fate hinge entirely off Feldbusch's unverified memory. And even if the detective was telling the truth, it doesn't rule out the possibility that the victim died from internal injuries weeks later. As for Bobby Joe Blythe, a separate video later surfaced online. In it, he casually lectures his students about his police contacts and how he can get away with anything inside his studio.
We don't tolerate bullshit from nobody in our domain. We black belts, this is our place. We can do what we want anytime we feel like it, and feel free as anybody could be in this world.
What we know for sure is that Blythe and his students never faced criminal charges for the Kung Fu Guy incident, despite the whole assault being caught on tape. That lack of accountability makes people suspect a police cover-up. The theory is that the small-town cops he helped train protected him. Some analysts find it awfully convenient that the only specific offences Officer Feldbusch recalled KFG committing, taking food off people's plates at Pizza Hut, were the exact same accusations Blythe listed in his YouTube description. Today, more than 40 years after the incident, the biggest questions remain unanswered. Who was KFG? What happened after they dragged him out the back door? Did he survive, or did an early viral video capture an unsolved murder? The victim's identity has never been confirmed. The only people who know what really happened are keeping their mouths shut. The tragic death of Christine Dacera, a young Filipina flight attendant, still dominates public debate and speculation. Staff found her dead on the morning of January 1st, 2021, inside the City Garden Grand Hotel in Makati. Security cameras filmed her in the hallways hours before she died. People are still arguing about how local police handled the case, what happened to the forensic evidence, and what actually killed her. Christine was 23 when she checked into the hotel on New Year's Eve. She asked her mother for permission to celebrate with her co-workers. After spending hours partying, friends rushed her to the Makati Medical Center early the next morning. Doctors declared her dead on arrival. Surveillance footage from the night before shows her hanging out with friends and acquaintances in the lobby and the hallways. Shortly after noon, her body was found in the bathtub of room 2207, covered in dark bruises and looking like she had been abused. Initial police reports called it a violent sexual assault and murder. Police rushed to file charges against 11 men who attended the party. They pointed to the bruises, lacerations, and biological material supposedly found in the room. But the official autopsy, performed by Police Major Michael Nick Sarmiento, threw a wrench in the narrative. He concluded Christine died from a ruptured aortic aneurysm, natural cause of death. Autopsy did note cuts on her thighs, bruises on her knees, and scratches. Those injuries made everyone wonder if she got hurt in a fight, or if they were just incidental. The family didn't buy the natural causes story and demanded a second autopsy, but those results were kept quiet. The story turned into a media circus. The Philippine National Police stood by the first autopsy and insisted she died of natural causes. The victim's family and critics argued the bruises and cuts pointed to a cover-up. People are still furious about how the police handled things. They rushed to close the case, publicly accusing a group of suspects before letting them go because they didn't have enough evidence. Critics say that ruined the men's reputations and left the forensic investigation in shambles. The worst mistake was the decision to completely embalm Christine's body before experts could finish a full forensic exam. Medical professionals say that move likely destroyed the biological evidence needed to solve the case. What actually happened to Christine is still a tragic mystery. The grainy security footage gives us brief glimpses of her final hours, but it doesn't tell us what really went down in that hotel room. Paula Abdul is a massive American pop star, choreographer, and TV personality. She blew up in the late 1980s with a string of hits. In 1991, she launched her Under My Spell World Tour, which ran until the end of 1992. 2 years later, she made a wild claim. She said she barely survived a horrific plane crash during that tour. The crash supposedly left her with serious injuries and forced her to stop performing for years. Abdul says she needed 15 spinal surgeries because of it, and the trauma derailed her career for 7 years. Abdul has told this story on television several times, offering vivid details of the crash and the aftermath. Early on, she said it happened in 1992 while flying between concert stops on a small private plane. She said, "It all happened when I boarded a 7-seater plane, and an hour into the flight, one of the engines blew up and the right wing caught fire and everything went black." She claimed she woke up in a hospital bed. "I woke up in the hospital only to find I had crushed my cervical spine, leaving me partially paralyzed." Abdul says she dealt with chronic pain and limited mobility for years. She often talks about how the crash killed her career momentum right at its peak. She usually says it took about 7 years of downtime before she could work again. That timeline stretches from the early 90s to the early 2000s, right before she landed her judging gig on American Idol. It's a tragic story, but the factual inconsistencies and the total lack of physical evidence make people wonder if it's true. The biggest issue is that there are zero official government record of a plane crash matching her description in 1992 or 1993. The National Transportation Safety Board logs every aviation accident, and they have nothing of Paula Abdul. No news outlets covered it at the time, which is strange because a fiery plane crash involving a huge pop star would make global headlines instantly. Skeptics argue that even if someone kept the crash site out of the flight logs, a famous singer showing up paralyzed at a hospital would definitely leak to the tabloids. Then there is the timeline. Abdul's story changes depending on when she tells it. Sometimes she says it happened in 1992 during the Under My Spell tour. Other times she says it happened in 1993, well after the tour ended. The tour wrapped up in 1992 and she wasn't on the road the following year. Abdul once claimed the accident happened on her birthday in June 1993, even though the tour was over by then. If a 7-seater plane crashes, you expect other people to remember it. There was a pilot, maybe a co-pilot, and probably other crew members on board. Not a single pilot, passenger, airport worker, or paramedic has ever backed up Abdul's story. Another contradiction comes from Abdul's own medical history. In some interviews, she mentions 2 different accidents in the early 90s, plane crash, and a confirmed car accident in 1992. In a 2019 interview with Parade magazine, Abdul said the 1992 car crash gave her severe neck injuries, and the 1993 plane crash left her partially paralyzed. People wonder if the plane crash actually happened, or if her memory slowly blended different traumatic events over time. The car wreck might explain all her physical injuries, making the plane crash story unnecessary. It's not clear why she highlights one event over the other, and the changing details fuel the skepticism. Her supporters argue there are valid reasons for the missing details. Surviving a traumatic event messes with your memory. It's also possible she lived through a terrifying in-flight emergency or a hard landing that didn't technically qualify as a crash on paper. If the pilot managed to bring a damaged plane down on a small airfield without anyone dying, they might not have reported it to federal authorities. In that scenario, there wouldn't be an NTSB record. Abdul might just call it a crash because it felt like one. If the plane lost an engine and slammed into a runway, she could have sustained serious neck and back trauma without the event leaving a bureaucratic paper trail. She definitely suffers from chronic pain issues that derail her career. For now, the truth is just out of reach. Skeptics and fans both make good points, leaving the whole thing open for debate. In October 1980, 47-year-old Cynthia Jabbour vanished while living in Las Vegas. Over the years, police tied her cold case to several other missing persons investigations. The whole mess eventually led to a massive murder conviction, even though they never found the body. Cynthia Jabbour was last seen alive around 10:30 p.m. on October 5th, 1980. She was standing in the lobby of her boyfriend's Las Vegas condo building. She told several close friends she was breaking up with him that night because he was getting jealous and possessive. When Jabbour didn't come home, her friends checked her apartment 2 days later and found nothing out of place. Her things were still there. Soon after, police found her car abandoned in a massive parking lot outside Caesars Palace. Plus, she left behind about $47,000 in investments. People don't usually walk away from that kind of money on purpose. Right from the start, this looked like foul play. Detectives zeroed in on Jabor's boyfriend, Robert Weeks. When they questioned him, Weeks claimed she just cancelled their dinner plans and he had no idea where she went. Investigators didn't buy it. Weeks agreed to take a polygraph test to clear his name, but then backed out at the last second, claiming he had to leave town for business. Within a month of Jabor going missing, Weeks fled the country. He went to Mexico and eventually settled in Chile. Running away made him look guilty, but with him gone and no physical evidence, the case stalled out for years. Exactly 3 years later, Weeks just walked back into the United States. He used a forged Libyan passport under the fake name Robert Smith. Somehow, border security didn't flag him. He settled back into life in the States, living openly as a Libyan national named Robert Smith. That detail is still one of the craziest parts of the timeline. The big break finally happened in 1986, when another woman connected to Weeks vanished the exact same way. On April 5th, 1986, Weeks' new girlfriend Carolyn Riley disappeared in San Diego. She went missing on the night she supposedly planned to break up with him. Police later found her car abandoned at a local hotel, mirroring Jabor's case perfectly. This pushed detectives to dig into Weeks' past. They found a dark pattern. Robert's ex-wife Patricia vanished in Las Vegas in April 1968, right after their bitter divorce. Her car was found abandoned. Back then, Weeks claimed she had a nervous breakdown and left the state. She was never seen again. And Weeks' former business partner, Jim Shaw, went missing in May 1971 after getting into a loud public argument with him. Police found Shaw's car abandoned with signs of extreme violence inside the cabin. With 4 missing people tied to Robert Weeks over 18 years, police knew they were dealing with a serial problem. In 1987, a national television show profiled the case. A viewer tip led police to a house in Tucson, Arizona, where Weeks was living under an alias. Local authorities arrested him on an unrelated fraud charge just to hold him while they built the murder case. They shipped Weeks back to Nevada, where he was indicted for killing both Cynthia Jabor and his ex-wife Patricia. They suspected him in the Riley and Shaw cases too, but didn't have enough physical evidence to charge him for those yet. Robert Weeks went on trial in Las Vegas in April 1988. Prosecutors argued he was a violent, possessive man who would do anything to stop women from leaving him. Witnesses testified about his jealousy and abuse, telling the jury that neither Cynthia nor Patricia would have walked away from their lives. The prosecution's best piece of evidence was Weeks' own diary. In one entry, he wrote that Cynthia had humiliated him beyond belief and vowed to even the score. The judge let the prosecution bring up the circumstantial evidence from the Carol Riley and Jim Shaw disappearances, even though Weeks wasn't officially charged with them. The jury found Weeks guilty of first-degree murder in both Cynthia's and Patricia's cases. A judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. It was the first time in Nevada history someone got a conviction like that without a physical body. Robert Weeks never told anyone what really happened to Cynthia Jabor or the others. Search teams never found their remains. Investigators think Weeks hid the bodies in abandoned desert mine shafts, which would explain the total lack of physical evidence. Weeks died in prison, taking the secret to his grave.